Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd gone through my usual routine, a quick breakfast, a check of my gear, and a glance at the weather report. Clear skies, mild temperatures, perfect hiking weather, too perfect maybe. As I stepped out onto my porch, I felt a strange heaviness in the air. The birds were quieter than usual, and the wind seemed to whisper through the trees with an eerie persistence. I shrugged it off. In this job, you learn to ignore the little things that set your nerves on edge. If you didn't, you'd never leave your cabin. I set out on my usual patrol, the crunch of gravel under my boots. A familiar comfort. The trail wound through dense forest, occasionally opening up to reveal breathtaking views of distant peaks. But even as I admired the scenery, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way shadows seemed to linger a little too long in the corners of my vision, or how the usual rustling of small animals in the underbrush was conspicuously absent. I've been doing this job long enough to trust my instincts, and right now they were screaming that something wasn't right. As noon approached, I found myself in a small clearing, taking a break and sipping water from my canteen. That's when the radio crackled to life, breaking the unnatural silence that had settled over the forest. "Ranger Dermot, we have reports of a missing person," the voice said. Hiker didn't check in at the ranger station. "Think you can handle that?" Our friend, that's 70% of the people who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did. Also, don't forget to press the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. From which country or city do you follow the channel? I've always said that a person could go their whole life without knowing just how lucky they were until they weren't. It was 1997, somewhere deep in the Cascade Range, Washington. I don't remember the exact trail. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd log into a report. It was the kind of place that could eat someone alive if you weren't paying attention. My name is Leo Dermot. I've been a ranger for 15 years, mostly for the solitude. Some people think it's about loving nature. No, it's about getting away from people. The trees don't lie to you. Don't try to sell you something you don't want. Out here, I could avoid the calls from my ex-wife, the suffocating small-town chatter, and the ever-growing suspicion that I'd made all the wrong choices. You spend enough time in the backcountry, you see things, dead hikers, wildlife attacks, and the occasional lunatic who decided to go off-grid permanently. You become numb to it. But that day, it wasn't any of the usual suspects. The morning had started like any other. I woken up in my small cabin, the smell of pine and last night's coffee still lingering in the air. Dispatchant's voice was static-filled and more out of habit than worry. I wasn't surprised. Missing hikers were as common around here as lost wallets. I responded in the affirmative and set out, momentarily forgetting my earlier unease in the face of a routine task. No real details were provided. A solo hiker, middle-aged male. No one said if he was experienced, but most of the time it didn't matter. Experience doesn't count when you're overconfident. As I headed down an old trail that wasn't even on most maps anymore, I couldn't help but reflect on the irony. People shouldn't have been there, but they always found a way. It was human nature, I suppose. The constant need to push boundaries, to explore the unknown, even when the unknown pushed back. Little did I know as I ventured deeper into the forest that this routine missing person case would lead me into a nightmare beyond anything I could have imagined. The trees loomed overhead, and branches reached out like gnarled fingers, and for the first time in years I felt a chill run down my spine. It had nothing to do with the temperature. Something was waiting for me in these woods, something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world and my place in it. And as the shadows lengthened and the day wore on, I walked unknowingly towards an encounter that would change my life forever. And in walking for hours, the air grew thicker and the forest grew quieter. You could hear the underbrush crackle beneath my boots. Nothing else. That's when I caught sight of something out of place. A smear of bright red on a branch about 20 feet off the trail. It wasn't much, could have been anything. A scrape, maybe someone fell, but it had that weird intensity, the kind that kicks up hairs on your neck. Blood in the woods always does that. I knelt and studied it, trying to figure out what I was dealing with. Fresh and wet. Somebody was hurt recently. My usual reaction was a sigh and an eye roll, figuring some idiot had twisted their ankle and left a bloody trail for me to follow. But it wasn't that easy. Something about this blood felt different. Wrong somehow. I radioed it in, giving dispatch my coordinates. Said I was checking it out, the procedural stuff. But as I spoke into the radio, my voice sounded hollow and distant, as if the forest itself was swallowing the sound. As I moved deeper off the trail, the undergrowth thickened. It was the kind of stuff people with no sense would push through and regret later. Thorny vines and low-hanging branches seemed to reach out, trying to impede my progress. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. The blood didn't seem like a random accident. It was more like someone or something was marking its path. Each new smear of red I found was deliberate, almost artistic in its placement. It was as if whatever had left these marks wanted to be followed. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I pressed my senses on high alert. The forest had taken on a dreamlike quality, the trees blurring together in a sea of green and brown. Time seemed to lose all meaning. Had I been walking for minutes or hours? The light filtering through the canopy had a strange reddish tint, as if the sun itself was bleeding. Another hour or so, and I found it a mangled mess of nylon, dirt, and splintered bone, the remains of a backpack torn to shreds. It wasn't just damage, though. Something was different about it. You see enough animal attacks, and you start to know what to expect. That this was calculated. I knelt beside the ruined pack, my hands shaking slightly as I examined the damage. The material hadn't just been ripped, it had been methodically shredded. Long, precise cuts ran along the seams, as if whatever had done this had intimate knowledge of how the pack was constructed. Inside, what remained of the hiker's supplies was scattered about. A crushed water bottle, its contents long since seeped into the forest floor. A map torn into confetti-like pieces, and a journal, its pages stained with something dark and viscous that I desperately hoped wasn't blood. With trembling fingers, I opened the journal to its last entry. The handwriting was erratic, barely legible. It's watching me, always watching. Not animal, not human. God help me. I don't know what it is. If anyone finds this, don't. The writing trailed off into a violent scrawl, as if the pen had been forcibly ripped away. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to run from this place as far as possible, but I couldn't. It was my job to find this person, or at least discover what had happened to them. As I stood, a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding in my chest. The forest had gone completely silent, not even the whisper of wind through the leaves. I stood perfectly still, straining my ears for any sound, any hint of movement. Nothing, but as I turned back to the shredded backpack, I noticed something I had missed before, a set of tracks leading away from the scene. They weren't animal tracks, at least not any animal I recognized. They were too large, too oddly shaped, and they were fresh. With a deep breath, I made a decision that would haunt me for years to come. I began to follow the tracks deeper into the heart of the forest, towards whatever nightmare awaited me. It was getting darker now. The light didn't disappear quickly in the forest, but it felt like it did. I grabbed my flashlight, casting an orange glow on the mess in front of me. There was nobody, just more blood, It was smeared all over the ground like someone had been dragged, but not by something small. I figured a bear at first. I mean, what else could shred a man and toss him like a rag doll? But there were no tracks, none. Bears don't care about hiding their tracks. This was something else entirely, something that didn't want to leave a trace. The beam of my flashlight danced across the forest floor, revealing more of the strange tracks I had noticed earlier. They were deeper now, as if whatever had made them was carrying something heavy. My mind flashed to the missing hiker, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I kept searching, muttering to myself about how I wasn't getting paid enough for this, cracking jokes that even the forest didn't seem to find funny. Humor had always been my defense mechanism, a way to keep the darkness at bay. But out here in this unnatural silence, my words fell flat, swallowed up by the oppressive atmosphere. I followed the trail of blood deeper into the trees each step, feeling like I was wading through molasses. The air had grown thick and heavy, filled with an odd metallic scent that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't long before I heard something. At first it sounded like a snapping branch, then a low thud, like something heavy being dragged. I both caught for a second, and I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" "This is Ranger Dermot. I'm here to help." No answer, of course. But the dragging sound stopped and it was replaced by a rhythmic scraping like metal on stone. Now, I've dealt with poachers and weirdos before, but this was different. It didn't feel right. Something inside me told me to turn around, to run as fast and as far as I could. At hell, if I ever listened to good advice, I stepped forward, shining my flashlight beam, which cut through the darkness like a knife. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to hold me back. But I pressed on, driven by a mix of duty and morbid curiosity. I emerged into a small clearing, and that's when I saw him. Or what was left of him, the missing hiker. His body was bent at an angle that nature didn't intend. Limbs twisted, his face was half gone. The ground beneath him was soaked in blood. And the worst part, his legs, from the knee down, were gone clean. Cut like someone had taken a saw to him. But there were no tools, no signs of struggle. It was as if whatever had done this had simply willed the man's legs away. I backed up, trying not to puke my mind, reeling from the impossible scene before me. Then I saw it. A movement behind the trees. My flashlight caught something, but it was too fast for me to get a good look. Whatever it was watching me. I know it sounds like some paranoid campfire story, but I'm telling you that thing was waiting for me. It had lured me here, led me step by step into its domain. And now, as I stood there surrounded by the evidence of its handiwork, I realized with horrifying clarity that I was no longer the hunter. I was the prey. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. In that moment, standing there with my pitiful flashlight and utterly inadequate training, I felt smaller and more vulnerable than I ever had in my life. Whatever was out there in the darkness, it wasn't natural. It wasn't something that could be explained by science or reason. It was a nightmare made flesh, and it had me exactly where it wanted me. As the realization sank in, I heard it again, that scraping sound, closer now, much closer. And this time it was accompanied by something else, a low guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I drew my knife, not that it had done much good. I wasn't armed beyond that, just standard issue gear. I'd had to carry a gun because, frankly, I'd never needed one. If something was going to get you out here, it wouldn't give you time to pull a trigger. But as I stood there, knife in one hand and flashlight in the other, I wished more than anything that I had anything more substantial to defend myself with. Because whatever was out there in the darkness, whatever had done this to the hiker, wasn't going to be deterred by a few inches of steel. The sound of heavy footsteps circled the clearing, then stopped. I spun around, flashlight darting across the trees, but nothing. It was quiet again, unnervingly so. That's when I realized the silence wasn't natural. Not a single bird, not even the hum of insects. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I had two choices, bolt or stand my ground. My instincts were screaming at me to run, get as far away from this place as possible, but I didn't. I was too stupid, too stubborn, or maybe both. I stayed scanning the trees, trying to make out what was lurking out there. And when it stepped out, slow and deliberate, what I saw in that moment would haunt my nightmares for years to come. I can't describe it perfectly because, honestly, I've never seen anything like it. It was hunched tall, covered in matted, almost oily fur. But that wasn't what caught my attention. Its limbs were too long, ending in something more like talons than hands. The body was like some kind of grotesque parody of a predator, a twisted amalgamation of every nightmarish creature I'd ever imagined. But its face, God, its face looked too human. The jaw hung unnaturally low, like it could unhinge at will, and there were remnants of that poor hiker's flesh still clinging to it. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were sunk deep into its skull, glowing with an otherworldly intelligence that sent chills down my spine. This wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. There was purpose behind those eyes, a malevolent consciousness that seemed to bore right through me. For a moment we just stared at each other. I was rooted to the spot, my knife hand trembling, while it stood there at the edge of the clearing, regarding me with what I could only describe as cruel amusement. The air between us crackled with tension, like the moment before a lightning strike. And then it moved. I'd like to say I stood my ground, that I faced the monster with courage and determination, but that would be a lie. I did the only thing I could. I ran. Now, I'm not some marathon runner, but adrenaline can make you fly. I didn't look back. I heard it crashing through the trees behind me, close enough that I could feel the ground vibrate with each step it took. I stumbled, tripping over roots and rocks, swearing with every breath. It was fast, faster than anything I've seen in these woods. It wasn't just trying to catch me, it was toying with me. The thing let out a strange wheezing noise, almost like laughter. That's when I knew it wasn't just hunting. It enjoyed this. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, leaving stinging cuts across my cheeks. My arms burned, screaming for air, but I didn't dare slow down. I could hear it right behind me, its hot breath on the back of my neck, those impossible talons just inches from my back. The ranger station wasn't close enough, so I veered off the trail, diving into a dense patch of trees, hoping to lose it in the underbrush. I managed to crawl under some thick brush and huddled there, listening. The footsteps slowed, getting closer, but more calculated now, like it was sniffing me out. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat feeling like it might give me away. I didn't breathe, I didn't move. I just watched, praying it would pass by. I could see its deformed silhouette against the fading daylight, moving with an unnatural grace that defied its monstrous appearance. It stopped a few feet away, sniffing the air. I could hear it breathing a wet, raspy sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was so close that I could smell it, a horrific mix of rotting meat and something else, something alien and indescribable. For what felt like an eternity, it stood there searching. I was sure it would find me, that at any moment those talons would rip through the brush and tear me to shreds. But then, miraculously, it turned and loped away, dragging something heavy behind it. I waited until the sound disappeared entirely before I dared to move. I crawled out, shaken but alive. My legs barely worked, but I forced myself back toward the station. Every step felt like I was moving through molasses. By the time I reached the clearing, the sky had dimmed completely. No sign of the creature. I burst through the door of the ranger station, locked it behind me, and slumped against the wall. The radio buzzed, but I didn't touch it. What the hell was I supposed to say? That something out there had killed that man and almost had me. They'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. I spent the night in the station, jumping at every sound. My knife clutched tightly in my hand. When morning came, I half expected to find it all had been some sort of twisted nightmare. But the cuts on my face and dirt on my clothes told a different story. They didn't find the hiker's body until 2 days later, or what was left of it. I didn't give them details. What was the point? They wouldn't believe me. And even if they did, what could they do? I filed the report, kept it as clean as I could, but the truth, I couldn't shake what I'd seen. That thing was still out there, waiting in the shadows of the forest. And I had a sinking feeling that this was far from over. The weeks following my encounter were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. Every shadow seemed to hide that monstrous form. Every rustle in the trees set my heart racing. I threw myself into my work, patrolling areas closer to civilization, avoiding the deep woods where I knew it lurked. But I couldn't escape the memories. They haunted me, creeping into my dreams and turning them into nightmares. I wake up in a cold sweat, the creatures in human eyes pouring into my soul. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Gone was the easygoing, joke-cracking Leo, and new in his place was a jumpy, irritable shell of a man. I chalked it up to stress, maybe PTSD from finding the hiker's remains. If only they knew the truth. I started researching, digging through old reports, some local legends, looking for any hint that others might have encountered this thing before. Most of what I found was useless. Campfire stories and urban legends. But there were a few accounts that gave me pause. A trapper in the 1800s described a devil beast that walked like a man but moved faster than any animal he had ever seen. A group of loggers in the 1950s who refused to return to a certain part of the forest after their camp was destroyed by something they couldn't explain. And then there were the missing persons reports. So many of them, stretching back decades, most written off as accidents or animal attacks. But now, knowing what I knew, I couldn't help but wonder how many of them had fallen victim to the creature I'd encountered. As I dug deeper, I started to notice a pattern. The disappearances seemed to cluster around certain areas, and they occurred in cycles. Every few years, there would be a spike in missing hikers and campers, and then nothing for a while. It was hunting methodically, patiently, and if I was right about the pattern, it was due to start again soon. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let more people fall victim to this thing. But what could I do? I was just one night armed with nothing but a knife and a flashlight. Going up against that creature again would be suicide. But then I remembered the fear in its eyes when my flashlight beam had caught it, the way it had hesitated just for a moment before charging. Maybe, just maybe it had weaknesses, and if it did, I was going to find them. I started preparing. I gathered every piece of information I could find about the area where I'd encountered it. I pored over maps, marking the locations of previous disappearances. I even started working out, pushing my body to its limits. If I were going to face this thing again, I needed to be ready. All while I kept up my duties as a ranger. I warned hikers away from areas I suspected were its hunting grounds and increased patrols in danger zones, but I knew it wasn't enough. Sooner or later, someone was going to stumble into its territory, and when they did, I had to be ready. As the weeks turned into months, my obsession grew. My cabin walls became covered with maps and notes. I barely slept, spending my nights poring over old books on local folklore and cryptozoology. I was determined to understand what this thing was, where it came from, and how to stop it. But the more I learned, the more questions I had. This creature didn't fit into any known category. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a wolf, or anything that should exist in this world. So what was it? And more importantly, how many more of them were out there? The answer came on a cold autumn night, nearly 6 months after my first encounter. I was on a late patrol skirting the edge of the area I now thought of as its territory. The forest was quiet, too quiet, just like that day. And I heard it. That familiar scraping sound, followed by a low guttural growl. My blood ran cold. It was back, and this time I wasn't running. I stood there frozen as the sound grew closer. My hand instinctively went to the knife at my belt, but I knew it would be useless against the creature. This time I was prepared, or at least I hoped I was. In the months since our last encounter, I had made some modifications to my gear. My flashlight was now equipped with the brightest bulb I could find, remembering how the creature had reacted to the light before. I also brought along a flare gun. Not standard issue, but I figured if this thing didn't like light, the flare might just give me the edge I needed. The growling grew louder, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush. My heart was pounding so hard. I was sure the creature could hear it, but I stood my ground waiting. Suddenly it burst from the trees, just as horrifying as I remembered. Those long twisted limbs, that two-human face contorted into a snarl, and those eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I could see recognition in its eyes. It remembered me too. And then it charged. I was ready this time. I dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding its slashing talons. As it passed, I brought up my flashlight, clicking it on and aiming the beam directly at its face. The effect was immediate. The creature recoiled, letting out a shriek that was part pain, part rage. It wasn't enough to stop it, but it gave me the opening I needed. I ran, not away from it this time, but deeper into the woods. I had a plan. Over the past months, I'd scouted this area extensively. I knew every tree, every rock, every dip in the terrain, and I was leading it exactly where I wanted it to go. The creature recovered quickly and gave chase. I could hear it crashing through the trees behind me, gaining ground with every step. But I just needed to stay ahead for a little longer. I burst into a small clearing one. I'd prepared for this very purpose. Strolling between the trees were several high-powered floodlights, all connected to a portable generator. As I raced across the clearing, I hit the switch. The forest exploded with light. The creature hot on my heels stumbled into the clearing and was caught in the glare. It let out a scream that made my blood run cold. A sound of pure agony. I turned to face it, flare gun raised. The creature was writhing in the light, its oily fur smoking slightly. For the first time, I saw fear in those inhuman eyes. But even as I prepared to fire the flare, something unexpected happened. The creature spoke. Wait, it rasped its voice, a horrifying mix of growl and human speech. You don't understand. I hesitated, my finger on the trigger. This was my chance to end it, to rid the forest of this monster once and for all. But curiosity got the better of me. Understand what? I demanded. The creature's form seemed to shimmer and shift in the harsh light. We were here first, it said, long before your kind. This is our home. My mind reeled. There were more of them. What did it mean? They were here first. But before I could ask any more questions, the generator sputtered and died. The lights flickered and went out, plunging us back into darkness. In that moment of blindness, I felt a rush of air as the creature moved. When my eyes adjusted, it was gone. But its last words echoed in my mind. This wasn't over, it was just the beginning. The encounter in the clearing left me shaken, but more determined than ever. The creature could speak. It had history, intelligence. This wasn't just some animal, but something far more complex and dangerous. I threw myself back into research with renewed vigor. If these things had been here first, as it claimed, there had to be some record of them. I dug deeper into local history, focusing on the earliest settlers and the Native American tribes that had lived in these mountains long before. What I found chilled me to the bone. There were stories passed down through generations of shadow people who lived in the deepest parts of the forest. Beings that were neither human nor animal, could move faster than the eye could see, and had an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The tribes had respected and feared these creatures, leaving offerings to appease them and warning their children never to venture too deep into the woods. Though when European settlers arrived, they dismissed these stories as superstition. They logged the forest, built roads and towns, encroaching further and further into the creatures' territory, and now it seemed that the creatures were pushing back. I compiled my findings, creating a detailed report of everything I had learned. But as I stared at the pages spread out before me, I realized I couldn't share this. Who would believe me? I'd be labeled a crackpot, probably fired from my job, and then who would be left to protect people from these things? No, I had to handle this myself, but I needed more information. I wanted to communicate with one of these creatures again to understand what they wanted and why they were killing. It was a risky plan, bordering on suicidal, but I was out of options. I gathered my gear, the modified flashlight, the flare gun, and this time, a digital recorder. If I was going to confront this thing again, I wanted evidence. I chose my spot carefully, a small cave system I discovered during my research. According to tribal stories, these caves had once been sacred to the shadow people. If anywhere was likely to draw them out, it was here. As night fell, I made my way to the cave entrance. The forest around me was eerily silent, as if every living thing knew to stay away. I took a deep breath, switched on my recorder, and entered the darkness. The cave was cool and damp. The beam of my flashlight barely penetrated the gloom. I moved slowly, careful not to make too much noise. Every shadow seemed to move, and every drip of water sounded like footsteps. Then I heard it, that familiar scraping sound echoing off the cave walls. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was what I had come for. I knew you there. I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. I want to talk. For a long moment there was silence. Then, from the darkness ahead came that rasping voice. You are either very brave or very foolish human. The creature stepped into view, its form seeming to materialize out of the shadows themselves. In the confined space of the cave, it looked even larger and more menacing. Why are you killing people? I demanded, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes fixed on me. We hunt to survive as all creatures do, it said. Your kind has taken our hunting grounds, driven us into the deepest parts of the forest. We must eat, but why now? You've been here for centuries. Why are the killings increasing? A low growl rumbled from the creature's throat. We grow fewer. Our young struggle to survive in this changed world. We must feed them, make them strong. The implications of its words hit me like a punch to the gut. These weren't just random attacks. This was a species fighting for survival. But before I could respond, the creature tensed, its nostrils flared, and it let out a snarl that made my blood run cold. You brought others, it growled, fury evident in its voice. I shook my head, confused. No, I came alone. But then I heard it too, voices coming from the cave entrance, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. In my obsession, I had been careless. Someone had followed me. The creature's eyes locked with mine, filled with a mix of anger and what I could only describe as betrayal. Then faster than I could blink, it was gone, melting back into the shadows. I stood there frozen as the voices grew closer. I recognized them now. Other rangers, probably sent to check on me after my erratic behavior of the past months. As all lights fell on me, I quickly switched off my recorder and plastered what I hoped was a convincing smile on my face. But even as I let them lead me out of the cave, my mind was racing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, and now, with others involved, the stakes were higher than ever. The weeks following the cave incident were tense. My colleagues were suspicious, asking questions I couldn't answer truthfully. I was put on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation. They thought I was having some sort of breakdown. If only they knew the truth. I used my time off to plan. The creature's words haunted me. They were fighting for survival, yes, but at what cost? How many more innocent hikers and campers would fall victim to their hunger? I couldn't just sit back and let it happen, but I also couldn't bring myself to simply hunt them down and exterminate them. They were intelligent beings, the last of their kind. There had to be another way. That's when an idea began to form. It was risky, potentially disastrous if it went wrong, but it was the only solution I could see that didn't end in more bloodshed. I spent days preparing, gathering supplies, and making arrangements. When everything was ready, I headed back into the forest, deep into the creature's territory. This time, I didn't try to hide my presence. I wanted them to find me. I set up camp in a small clearing, built a fire, and waited. As night fell, the forest grew quiet. That familiar oppressive silence settled over the trees. They were coming. I stood facing the darkness beyond the firelight. I know you're out there. I called. I've come to make a proposal. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, slowly, they emerged from the shadows. Not just one this time, but three of the creatures, the largest, which I recognized from our previous encounters, stepped forward and spoke in human. What proposal could you possibly offer us? I growled. I took a deep breath. This was it. The sanctuary. I said, a protected area deep in the forest where you can live and hunt without fear of human encroachment. The creatures exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. And how would you accomplish this? The leader asked, skepticism evident in its voice. I have connections, I explained. I can have this area declared a protected wildlife reserve. No logging, no development, no hikers or campers. It would be yours in exchange for what the creature demanded, an end to the killings. I said firmly, you stay in your territory, we stay in ours. Any humans who accidentally wander in are to be scared off, not hunted. The creatures conferred among themselves, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. Finally, the leader turned back to me. And if we refuse, I steeled myself, then I'll have no choice but to reveal your existence to the world. You'll be hunted, studied, maybe wiped out entirely. It was a bluff, of course. I had no intention of exposing them, but they didn't know that the leader studied me for a long moment. Its inhuman eyes seeming to peer into my very soul. Then slowly it nodded. We accept your proposal, human, but know this. If your kind breaks this agreement, if they encroach on our territory, we will not show mercy. I nodded, relief washing over me. I understand and thank you. As the creatures melted back into the darkness, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was done. A truce of sorts had been struck. In the months that followed, I pulled every string I could to make good on my promise. It wasn't easy, and there were times I thought I'd fail, but eventually a large swath of the deepest, most remote part of the forest was declared a protected wildlife reserve closed to all human activity. I never told anyone the real reason behind my push for the reserve. As far as the world was concerned, it was just an effort to protect endangered species and preserve the natural environment. But I knew the truth, and every time I looked out at those dense, forbidding woods, I was reminded of the secret they held. I still work as a ranger, though I stick to more populated areas now. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think I hear that familiar scraping sound in the distance, a reminder of the pact we made. I always said that a person could go their whole life without knowing just how lucky they were until they weren't. That day in the forest changed everything for me. It opened my eyes to a world beyond what most people can imagine. A world where ancient creatures still lurk in the shadows. Some nights I wonder if I made the right choice, if the truce will hold, if I've done enough to protect both sides. But then I remember the alternative, endless bloodshed, a war that would likely end in extinction for them, and untold human casualties. No, this was the best solution. An uneasy peace, but peace nonetheless. I never told anyone the full story of what happened out there. Who would believe me? But I carry it with me always as a reminder that the world is bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than we know. And as for those woods, well, if you're ever hiking in the Cascade Range and you come across warnings about a restricted wildlife area, take my advice, turn back. Some parts of this world aren't meant for us. Some secrets are best left in the shadows because out there, in the deepest, darkest parts of the forest, something is watching, waiting, and it remembers. It was late September 2019 when everything took a strange turn in Glacier National Park. My name is Orson Blackwood, and I've been a search and rescue officer for the United States Forest Service for the past 11 years. I guess you could say the mountains are in my blood. My grandfather was a park ranger, and my father taught me how to track deer before I could ride a bike. When I'm not out on the field, I'm usually tinkering with my old pickup truck or trying to perfect my campfire chili recipe, not that anyone's complained yet. One crisp morning, just as I was contemplating whether instant coffee counts as a crime against humanity, the radio crackled to life. A group of college students from Missoula had failed to check in after a 3-day hike along the Highline Trail. I thought, great, another episode of When Selfies Go Wrong. I grabbed my gear and headed out, hoping they just lost track of time and the beauty of the backcountry. I met up with my colleague, Eli Thompson, at the trailhead. It is the kind of guy who thinks flannel is formal wear and believes bacon grease is a food group ready for another wild goose chase, he asked, grinning. As long as the geese don't mind, I replied. Besides, it's either this or paperwork, and you know how I feel about that. We started up the trail with the sun casting long shadows through the pine. The first few miles were uneventful, filled with the usual squirrel chatter and distant bird calls. Eli was in the middle of recounting his latest fishing mishap, something about a trout that got away due to a faulty reel. When we came across the first sign that something was off, a backpack lay torn beside the trail. Its contents, scattered clothes, a map, a half-eaten sandwich. It looked like it had been ransacked by an animal. Could be a bear, Eli muttered, kneeling to inspect the damage. I frowned. Maybe, but look at these marks. Too deep and the claw pattern doesn't match. You're not suggesting Bigfoot, are you? Eli chuckled. Or if he is, he owes me $20, I said, trying to lighten the mood, but inside a knot of unease tightened. Something wasn't right. We pressed on, calling out the students' names: Laura, Mike, Jess, anyone out here. Only the wind answered, rustling through the trees. About a mile further, we found more signs: a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch, a broken hiking pole. Then we came upon a clearing that made my stomach drop. Scattered across the ground were more belongings: a smashed phone, a cracked water bottle, and blood. Not a lot, but enough to set off alarm bells. Eli's face lost its usual jovial expression. This just got serious, he said quietly. Yeah, I agreed. We need to radio this in. As I reached for my radio, it hissed with static and then died completely. That's odd, I said, tapping it. Battery's full. Mine's down too. Eli said, frowning. Must be some interference. Great, I muttered. No radios, missing hikers, and something that tears through gear like tissue paper. Just another day in paradise. We decided to keep moving, hoping to find higher ground for a signal. The trail became steeper and the forest denser. The usual sounds of wildlife seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. It feels like we're being watched, Eli whispered. I nodded. Probably just a mountain lion sizing us up. It makes me wish I'd brought my bad jokes to scare it off. Eli smirked. Your jokes scare everyone off. We continued, but the uneasy feeling grew. Then we heard it. A distant, unnatural sound echoing through the trees. It wasn't an animal call I'd ever heard before. What was that? Eli asked, his hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on his belt. No idea, I replied, but I don't think it's auditioning for the choir. We moved cautiously, scanning our surroundings. The underbrush rustled, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of movement. Large shape darting between the trees. Eli, did you see that? Yeah, he said tightly, and I don't think it was Bambi. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far beyond our usual search and rescue mission. Little did I know our night was about to take a turn into the realm of nightmares. We pressed on, and soon we found a small campsite. The remains of a fire smoldered, and there were 3 tents ripped apart as if by something with incredible strength. Dear God. Eli whispered, and then we saw them. 2 bodies, torn and battered, lay sprawled on the ground. It was a gruesome sight, deep gashes, limbs at unnatural angles. I forced down the bile rising in my throat. We need to get out of here, Eli said. Urgently agreed, I said. But we have to find the 3rd one. There were 3 hikers, as if on cue. A faint cry reached our ears. Help. We spun around. Did you hear that? I asked over there. Eli pointed toward a cluster of rocks. We approached cautiously, and behind the rocks we found her, Laura. She was injured, a deep cut on her leg, but alive. Please. She gasped. You're safe now. I assured her we're going to get you out of here, but before we could move, that sound echoed again, closer. This time, a chill settled in the air. Time to go, Eli said, helping Laura to her feet. We began to make our way back down the trail, moving as quickly as we could, with Laura limping between us. The forest seemed to close in around us, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. Then, without warning, Eli was yanked backward with incredible force. He let out a cry as he was pulled into the underbrush. Eli, I shouted, drawing my knife. Laura clumped in panic in her eyes. I moved toward where Eli had disappeared, but all I found was his hat, blood staining the brim. The reality hit me like a punch to the gut. We have to keep moving, I told Laura, swallowing hard, but she began. We can help him if we're not safe, I said firmly. Come on. We stumbled through the forest, every snap of a twig setting my nerves on edge. Whatever was out there was stalking us, playing a deadly game. What's after us? Laura whispered. I don't know, but it's all friendly. We reached a slope that led down toward the river. If we can get to the water, we might be able to follow it back to the ranger station, I said. Behind us, I could hear branches breaking, something large moving swiftly. At the bottom, we splashed into the shallow river. The cold water shocked my system, but there was no time to think about that. We moved downstream, the current helping us along. But then ahead on the bank, I saw it, a massive figure silhouetted against the trees. It stood on 2 legs covered in matted fur, with arms that hung down past its knees. Its head was elongated, almost canine, but larger than any wolf I'd ever seen. Was that a joke? I muttered to myself, because I'm not laughing. Laura stared in horror. What is that bad news? I replied. Stay behind me. The creature emitted a deep, resonant noise that seemed to vibrate the very air. It stepped into the river, moving toward us with a predatory grace. I reached for the flare gun strapped to my pack. Let's see how it likes fireworks. I fired at its feet, the flare igniting with a burst of light and heat. The creature recoiled, shielding its face. Run, I shouted. We scrambled up the opposite bank. The creature, momentarily distracted, recovered quickly and continued its pursuit. We burst into a clearing where an old ranger cabin stood, a relic from decades past. In here, I yelled. We slammed the door behind us, barring it with a heavy wooden beam. The cabin was dark and musty, but it was shelter. "Do you think it'll hold?" Laura asked, her voice shaking. "Well, it's not exactly up to code," I said, "but it's better than nothing. Got any other bright ideas?" She managed a weak smile. I'm open to suggestions. I searched the cabin and found an old radio. "By his work," I whispered, fiddling with the knobs. "Static." Then, faintly, a voice. "This is Ranger Station Alpha. Do you copy?" "Yes," I shouted. "This is Officer Blackwood. We need immediate assistance at the old north cabin. There's..." I hesitated. "A hostile creature. Eli Thompson is down. 2 civilians deceased, 1 injured. Repeat. Did you say hostile creature?" "Affirmative," I said. "And unless you got a better term, that's what I'm going with. Pull tight, Orson. Help is on the way." I set down the radio. "Reinforcements are coming," I told Laura. The creature began pounding on the door, the wood creaking under the strain. "I don't think the door is gonna hold," she said. "Probably not," I agreed. "But I've got one more trick up my sleeve." I grabbed an old can of kerosene and began dousing the floor near the entrance. "When I say so, get ready to move." The door began to splinter. The creature's arm punched through, claws scraping at the air. "Now," I yelled, tossing a match onto the kerosene. Flames roared to life and the creature recoiled. We dashed out the back window, landing awkwardly but unharmed. The creature was momentarily distracted by the fire, giving us a head start. We ran toward the sound of approaching helicopters. The cavalry had arrived. Better late than never. A spotlight illuminated us as we waved frantically. Rangers descended, weapons at the ready. The creature emerged from the trees, smoke billowing from its fur, but seemingly unfazed. The Rangers opened fire, bullets tore into it, and the creature let out another unnatural sound. This time a roar of pain. It turned and retreated into the darkness of the forest. I collapsed to the ground, exhaustion overtaking me. Laura sank beside me, relief washing over her face. "Well, if this is my acting debut, I want a better agent," I quipped, trying to lighten the mood. The Rangers helped us to our feet. "What was that thing?" one of them asked. "No idea," I said. "But it doesn't like flare guns or bullets. So at least we know it has some weaknesses." As the helicopter lifted us away from the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The creature was still out there, and I had a sinking feeling our paths would cross again. The next few days passed in a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. Laura was treated for her injuries and released from the hospital, but the haunted look in her eyes told me she would be carrying more than just physical scars from that night. I sat on the ranger station, staring at the incident report on my desk. The official story labeled it as a bear attack, but those of us who were there knew better. How do you explain something you can barely comprehend yourself? Captain Reeves, my supervisor, entered the office. She was a no-nonsense woman who'd seen her fair share of strange occurrences in the park, but even she seemed shaken by recent events. "How are you holding up, Blackwood?" she asked. Leaning against my desk, I rubbed my eyes, fighting off another wave of fatigue. "I've been better." "Any word on Eli?" She shook her head, her expression grim. "The search team found some remains. They're running DNA tests." But I nodded, unable to finish the thought. Eli had been more than just a colleague. He was a friend, a brother in arms. The guilt of leaving him behind gnawed at me, even though I knew there was nothing more I could have done. "What about the creature? Any sightings?" Reeves replied, Nothing concrete. We got increased patrols in the area, but so far it's like chasing a ghost. I lean back in my chair, my mind racing. It doesn't make sense, Captain. I've been in these woods my entire life. I've never seen or heard of anything like that before. Reeves sighed. I know, listen, but until we have more information, we're treating this as an isolated incident. The higher-ups don't want to cause a panic. I scoffed. So we're just gonna pretend it didn't happen. Nothing is still out there. I'm not saying that. She said her tone sharp, but we need to approach this carefully. I got calls coming in from wildlife services, cryptozoologists, even some government types asking questions. This situation is bigger than just us now. I stood up, pacing the small office. We can just sit back and wait for it to attack again. There has to be something we can do. Reeves watched me for a moment, then nodded. All right, Blackwood, I'm giving you some leeway here. Dig into this, but keep it quiet. If there's more to this story, I want to know about it. I felt a small surge of relief. At least I wouldn't be sitting on my hands. Thank you, Captain. We'll start right away. As Reeves left the office, I turned to my computer. If I was going to unravel this mystery, I needed to start at the beginning. I pulled up local histories, folklore, and any reports of unusual animal sightings in the area. Hours passed as I sifted through information. Most of it was standard fare, bear encounters, the occasional mountain lion sighting. But then something caught my eye, an old news article from the 1950s about a series of unexplained disappearances in the park. The details were vague, but there was a mention of a large unidentified predator. I dug deeper, cross-referencing dates and locations. A pattern began to emerge. Every few decades there would be a spike in missing persons cases and unusual animal sightings. The reports were spread out, easy to dismiss individually, but when viewed together they painted a disturbing picture. My phone buzzed, startling me out of my research haze. It was a text from an unknown number. Meet me at Whitefish Lodge 9p. Come alone. I stared at the message, my mind racing. It had to be Laura, but why the secrecy? I glanced at the clock. It was 7:30. I had just enough time to make it to Whitefish if I left now. As I grabbed my jacket and keys, a chill ran down my spine. Something told me this meeting would be the key to unraveling the mystery of what happened in those woods. But was I ready for the truth? I stepped out into the cool evening air. The sun was setting behind the mountain. Whatever answers awaited me at Whitefish Lodge, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The drive to Whitefish Lodge was tense, my mind replaying the events of that night in the forest, the creature's inhuman howl, the terror in Laura's eyes, the sickening realization that Eli was gone. It all swirled together in a nightmarish loop. I pulled into the lodge's parking lot at 8:55 p.m. The place was quiet. Tourist season long, A few lights glowed in the windows, but otherwise the building loomed dark and imposing against the starry sky. I made my way to the entrance, scanning the area for any sign of Laura. The lobby was deserted, save for a bored-looking clerk behind the desk. He barely glanced up as I entered. "Excuse me," I said, approaching the desk. "I'm supposed to meet someone here, a woman named Laura." The clerk shrugged. "Haven't seen anyone come in for a while, but there's a lady sitting out on the back patio, been there for about an hour." I nodded my thanks and made my way through the lodge. The back patio overlooked the lake. The water, a sheet of black glass reflecting the night sky, and there, huddled in a thick jacket, was Laura. She turned as I approached, her face a mix of relief and apprehension. "Awesome," she said. "Thank you for coming." I sat down across from her, studying her closely. The physical wounds were healing, but there was a haunted look in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Are you okay? Why all the secrecy?" Laura glanced around nervously before leaning in. "I couldn't talk about this at the hospital or during the debriefings," she whispered. "They wouldn't have believed me, but I know you saw it too." I nodded slowly. "The creature, it's more than just a creature, Orson," she whispered. "It's something ancient, something that shouldn't exist." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" Laura took a deep breath. After it attacked our camp when Mike and Jess were, she swallowed hard. I ran. I hid in a small cave, and I heard it talking. I found... Talking, you mean? Not like a person, she interrupted, but not like an animal either. It was chanting, I think, in a language I've never heard before. How wisely made my head hurt just listening to them. I leaned back trying to process this information. "Laura, are you sure you were traumatized?" "In shock." "I know what I heard," she said fiercely, "and that's not all. Look at this." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing her forearm in the dim light. I could see a strange mark on her skin. It looked like a brand or a tattoo. A series of interlocking symbols that seemed to shift and move as I stared at them. "What is that?" I asked, reaching out to touch it. Laura jerked her arm back. "Don't it? It burns when anyone else touches." I don't know how it got there, but ever since that night I've been having these dreams, nightmares about the creature, about this symbol, and about other things, terrible things. I sat back, my mind reeling. This was way beyond anything I'd encountered in my years as a search and rescue officer. "Have you told anyone else about this?" She shook her head. "Who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy, but I knew you'd understand. You were there, you saw it." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I saw it, and I've been doing some digging. There's more to this than we realized. Laura, this thing, I think it's been around for a long time." I filled her in on what I discovered about the pattern of disappearances and sightings over the years. As I spoke, I could see the fear growing in her eyes, but also a glimmer of something else, determination. "We have to stop it," she said when I finished. "Whatever it is, we can let it keep hurting people." I sighed. "I agree, but how? We don't even know what we're dealing with." Laura's hand went to her arm, tracing the strange symbols. Maybe this is the key. These dreams I've been having, they feel like more than just nightmares. It's like they're trying to tell me something." Before I could respond, a sharp crack echoed across the lake. We both jumped, scanning the darkness. "Probably just a branch breaking," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But Laura's face had gone pale. "No," she whispered. "It's here." It found me, as if, in response, that bone-chilling howl would heard in the forest, split the night air. It was close, too close. "We need to go," I said, standing up and pulling Laura to her feet. Then we raced back through the lodge, ignoring the startled clerk. As we burst out into the parking lot, I saw a large shape moving at the edge of the trees. "My car," I said, fumbling for my keys quick. We piled in and I gunned the engine tires, squealing as we peeled out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of glowing eyes and matted fur before we turned onto the main road. "Where do we go?" Laura asked, her voice shaking. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. "I don't know, but we can stay here. Whatever that thing is, whatever's going on, we're in this together now." As we sped into the night, leaving Whitefish Lodge behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were driving towards something far bigger and more terrifying than we could imagine. The hunt had begun, but who was the predator and who was the prey? The headlights cut through the darkness as we sped down the winding mountain road. Laura sat beside me, clutching her marked arm, her eyes constantly scanning the forest, pressing in on either side. "We need a plan," I said, breaking the tense silence. "We can just keep driving forever." Laura nodded, her voice tight. I think I know someone who might be able to help. Professor Elena Vasquez, a professor I had in college. She specialized in folklore and mythology with a focus on Native American legends. I raised an eyebrow.
You think this has something to do with Native American myths?
Laura admitted, I don't know, but some of the symbols in my dreams reminded me of things I saw in her class, and right now it's the only lead we've got. She had a point. I nodded. Alright, where can we find her? Last I heard she was doing research at the University of Montana in Missoula. I did some quick mental calculations. That's about a 3-hour drive from here. Think you can stay awake that long? Laura managed a weak smile. After what we've been through, I don't think I'll sleep for a week. As we drove, Laura filled me in on what she remembered from Dr. Vasquez's class. Stories of shapeshifters, forest spirits, and ancient beings that walked the land long before human. It all sounded like fantasy, but after what we've seen, I was ready to believe just about anything. We reached Missoula just as dawn was breaking. The city was starting to stir, with early risers heading to work or grabbing their morning coffee. It felt surreal to be surrounded by such normalcy after the terror of the night. We found the university easily enough, but locating Dr. Vasquez proved more challenging. The campus was largely deserted, as summer break was in full swing. Finally, we managed to track down a graduate student who pointed us towards a small office in the anthropology building. Dr. Vasquez was a small, wiry woman with sharp eyes and salt and pepper hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked up from a stack of papers as we entered. Her expression curious. "Can I help you?" she asked. Laura stepped forward. Dr. Vasquez, I'm Laura Chin. I took your class on Native American mythology a few years ago. Recognition flickered in the professor's eyes. Ah yes, I remember you wrote that excellent paper on trickster spirits. What brings you here? Laura hesitated, glancing at me. I nodded encouragingly. We need your help. Laura said something happened, something I can't explain, but I think it might be connected to the legends you taught us about. Dr. Vasquez's eyebrows rose. Oh, that sounds intriguing. Please sit down and tell me more. Over the next hour, we recounted our experiences in Glacier National Park, the attack on the campsite, the creature Wed encountered, the strange mark on Laura's arm. As we spoke, Dr. Vasquez's expression grew increasingly grave. When we finished, she sat back in her chair, her fingers steepled in thought. What you're describing, it aligns with some very old stories, legends that most dismiss as mere superstition. What kind of legends, I asked. Dr. Vasquez stood, moving to a bookshelf crammed with old volumes, and selected one. Flipping through its pages, she turned the book towards us, revealing an illustration that made my blood run cold. The creature depicted was unmistakably similar to what we'd seen in the forest, but the Amarak is more than just a predator, Dr. Vasquez continued. In some stories, it's described as a guardian of ancient knowledge, a being that exists between our world and something else. Laura leaned forward, her eyes wide with concern at the symbols on my arm. Could they be connected to this? Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly. It's possible. In some versions of the legend, the Amarak was said to mark those it encountered, binding them to its will or granting them visions of hidden truths. I felt a chill run down my spine. So what does this mean for us? For Laura? The professor's expression was grim. I'm afraid I can't say for certain. These old stories and much has been lost to time, but if even a fraction of the legends are true, you may be in grave danger. Great, I muttered. So what do we do? Dr. Vasquez closed the book with a snap. I have a colleague who might be able to help us further, an expert in cryptozoology and paranormal phenomena. He has unconventional methods, but he's our best chance at understanding what you're dealing with. She scribbled an address on a piece of paper and handed it to me. His name is Dr. Marcus Blackwood. You'll find him at this address. Be cautious, though. The path you're on may lead to truths that are better left undiscovered. As we left Dr. Vasquez's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just taken a step deeper into a world we barely understood. The sun was high in the sky now, but somehow the shadows seemed longer and darker than before. Ready for another road trip? I asked Laura as we headed back to the car. She nodded, her jaw set with determination. Let's go. Whatever this thing is, whatever it wants, with me. I need answers. As Walt pulled out of the university parking lot, I glanced at the address Dr. Vasquez had given us. Dr. Marcus Blackwood. The name niggled at something in the back of my mind, but I couldn't quite place it. Little did I know our journey was about to take an even stranger turn, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world and my place in it. The address Dr. Vasquez had given us led us to a remote cabin about an hour outside of Missoula. As we pulled up the winding dirt road, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The dense forest pressed in on all sides, reminding me too much of our encounter in Glacier National Park. The cabin itself was a ramshackle affair, looking like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and sheer stubbornness. Solar panels jutted out at odd angles from the roof, and a collection of strange antennae sprouted from the chimney. The yard was cluttered with what looked like scientific equipment, mixed with items you'd expect to find at a New Age fair. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Laura asked. Eyeing the cabin skeptically, I double-checked the address. Unless there's another Dr. Marcus Blackwood hiding out in these woods? This is it. We approached the front door, picking our way through a maze of crystals and what appeared to be partially dismantled electronics. I raised my hand to knock, but before I could, the door swung open. Visitors, right on time. Come in, come in. The man who greeted us was not what I expected. He was tall and lanky, with wild gray hair that stuck out in all directions. He wore a lab coat covered in mysterious stains, and a pair of goggles was perched on top of his head, but it was his eyes that caught my attention. Right piercing and filled with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "Dr. Blackwood?" I asked tentatively. He waved a hand dismissively. "Marcus, please, or Doc if you prefer, you must be the ones." Helena called about the Amarok encounter. Yes, we nodded a bit, taken aback by his enthusiasm. "Fascinating, truly fascinating," Marcus said, ushering us inside. "I've been studying reports of the Amarok for years, but to meet someone who's actually encountered it, well, this is a red-letter day." Indeed, the interior of the cabin was just as chaotic as the outside. Every surface was covered with books, papers, strange artifacts, and bits of technology. I couldn't begin to identify a large whiteboard dominated one wall, covered in a maze of equations and diagrams that made my head spin just looking at them. Marcus cleared off a couple of chairs, gesturing for us to sit now. "Don't tell me everything. Don't leave out a single detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem." For the second time that day, Laura and I recounted our story. Marcus listened intently, occasionally interrupting with questions or to scribble something in a notebook. When we finished, he sat back, tapping a pen against his chin thoughtfully. Yes, it all fits," he muttered. "The timing, the location, the mark. It's just as the prophecy foretold." I exchanged a glance with Laura. "Prophecy?" I asked. Her crow's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, it's all here in the Codex Lupus." He pulled an ancient-looking book from a nearby shelf, its leather cover worn and cracked with age. Obscure text largely dismissed by mainstream academia, but I've long suspected it held the key to understanding the Amarok in its true nature. He flipped through the pages, stopping at an illustration that looked eerily similar to the mark on Laura's arm. "You see, the Amarok isn't just a creature, it's a guardian, a gatekeeper between our world and, well, something else entirely." Laura leaned forward, her voice tense. "What do you mean?"
Something else?
Perkins' expression grew serious. There are realms beyond our own, mission planes of existence that intersect with ours in ways we can barely comprehend. The Amarok stands at one of these intersections, protecting ancient knowledge and power that could reshape reality itself. I felt a headache coming on. This was all getting a bit too metaphysical for my taste.
Okay, but what does this have to do with us, with what happened in Glacier?
Marcus turned to Laura. The mark on your arm, my dear. It's not just a symbol, it's a key. The Amarok has chosen you for something, a test perhaps, or a task. The dreams you've been having, they're not just nightmares, they're glimpses into that other realm. Laura's face had gone pale. But why me? I didn't ask for this. Few ever do, Marcus said softly. But the Amarok doesn't choose randomly. There must be something about you, something special that made you the right candidate. I stood up, pacing the cluttered room. This is insane. You're talking about other dimensions, ancient guardians. It's like something out of a bad sci-fi novel. Lurkus fixed me with a piercing stare. Is it any more insane than what you've already seen? Mr. Blackwood, the world is far stranger than most people realize. You've been given a glimpse behind the curtain. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? I froze, something clicking in my mind. Wait, did you say Blackwood? That's my last name. Marcus' eyebrows rose. Is it now? How interesting. Perhaps your involvement in this is not as coincidental as we thought before. I could process that bombshell. A piercing howl split the air outside. It was a sound I'd hoped never to hear again. Marcus jumped to his feet. It's here, quickly. We must prepare for the convergence upon us. As he rushed around the cabin, gathering strange implements and chanting in a language I didn't recognize. I caught Laura's eye. The fear I saw there mirrored my own, but there was something else too. A determination, a spark of curiosity about the unknown. Whatever was coming, whatever this convergence meant, I knew our lives would never be the same again. The howl came again, closer this time, and I steeled myself for what was to come. The hunt is on, and this time we're the prey. The cabin seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. As Marcus rushed about muttering incantations and gathering an assortment of bizarre objects, Laura and I stood frozen, unsure whether to help or run for our lives. Quick, Marcus shouted, thrusting items into our hands. The salt circle, we must complete it before the Amarok breaches the perimeter. I found myself pouring a thick line of salt around the edges of the room. While Laura placed strange crystals at strategic points, Marcus stood in the center, consulting the Codex Lupus and drawing intricate symbols on the floor with what looked suspiciously like blood. Another howl shook the cabin, this one so close it made my teeth rattle. The lights flickered, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw shadows moving where no shadows should be. It's coming, Laura cried, clutching her marked arm. The symbols there were glowing, now pulsing with an eerie blue light. Marcus' voice rose to a fever pitch, the strange words tumbling from his lips in a torrent. The air grew thick and heavy, like trying to breathe underwater, and then, with a sound like reality itself tearing apart, everything shifted. The walls of the cabin seemed to melt away, revealing a vast starlit expanse. We stood on what appeared to be a floating island of rock, surrounded by an endless void filled with swirling colors and impossible geometries. And there, at the edge of our little sanctuary, stood the Amarok. It was both exactly as I remembered and somehow more larger, more ancient, its fur rippling with patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Its eyes, though. Those eyes held an intelligence, a wisdom that was undeniably alien, yet unmistakably sentient. Holy shit. I breathed, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Marcus stepped forward, his earlier manic energy replaced by a calm reverence. "Great Guardian," he intoned. "We stand before you, seekers of knowledge and truth." The Amarok's gaze swept over us, lingering on Laura when it spoke. Its voice resonated not in our ears, but directly in our minds. The cycle turns once more. The chosen has come as foretold. Laura stepped forward, her face a mix of fear and determination. "What do you want from me?" "Don't want. The balance must be maintained. The veil between worlds grows thin." Images flashed through my mind, glimpses of other realities, of creatures and civilizations beyond imagining. I saw great cities of crystal and light, and vast dark spaces between the stars teeming with life, and through it all a sense of impending doom, of cosmic forces on the verge of collapse. "The convergence," Marcus whispered. "It's more than just a meeting of worlds. It's the end of all things." The Amarok finished. "Unless the chosen fulfills their role," Laura's mark was blazing now, the light spreading up her arm and across her body. "What do I have to do?" The Amarok's form seemed to ripple, and suddenly it was no longer a wolf-like creature, but a swirling vortex of energy. "Become the bridge, unite the realms, restore the balance." Before any of us could react, tendrils of light shot out from the vortex, enveloping Laura. She cried out, not in pain, but in shock, as her body began to glow from within. "Laura," I shouted, reaching for her, but Marcus held me back. "This is her destiny," he said solemnly. "We cannot interfere." I watched in awe and terror as Laura's form began to shift and change. She grew taller, her skin taking on an otherworldly sheen. Wings of pure energy unfurled from her back, and her eyes held the light of 1,000 stars. When she spoke, her voice echoed with power. "I understand now. I see everything." The vortex that was the Amarok swirled around her, merging with her transformed body. The entire realm seemed to pulse and shift, reality bending and reshaping itself. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. We were back in the cabin, the early morning light streaming through the windows as if nothing had happened. But Laura was gone. Marcus slumped to the floor, exhausted but exhilarated. "It is done. The convergence has been averted, the balance restored." I stared at the spot where Laura had stood, my mind reeling. What? That just happened. "Where is she?" The old man smiled sadly. "Everywhere and nowhere. She has become part of the cosmic tapestry, a guardian of reality itself. Her sacrifice has saved us all." I felt a mix of emotions, grief, awe, and a profound sense of how small and insignificant we truly were in the grand scheme of things. "Will we ever see her again?" Marcus shrugged. "Who can say? The ways of the universe are mysterious, but I believe that in times of great need, when the veil grows thin once more, she may yet appear to those with the eyes to see as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the cluttered cabin." I tried to process everything that had happened. The world I thought I knew had been forever changed, and I knew I could never go back to my old life. "What now?" I asked, feeling lost and overwhelmed. Marcus grinned, some of his earlier manic energy returning. "Now, my boy, now the real work begins. There are more mysteries out there, more cosmic truths to uncover, and something tells me you're just the man to help me find them." As I looked around the cabin at the books and artifacts that now held me reading, I felt a stirring of excitement beneath my exhaustion. The world was stranger and more wonderful than I'd ever imagined, and I was standing on the threshold of something truly extraordinary. "All right, Doc," I said, a smile tugging at my lips. "Where do we start?" In the months that followed our encounter with the Amarok and Laura's transformation, my life took on a surreal quality. I found myself dividing my time between my duties as a search and rescue officer and assisting Marcus in his esoteric research. We pored over ancient texts, cross-referencing legends and myths from cultures around the world. I learned to see patterns in seemingly unrelated events, to recognize subtle signs of otherworldly influence in our reality. There were moments when the weight of what we witnessed threatened to overwhelm me. I'd awake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the echo of the Amarak's howl ringing in my ears. But there was also a sense of purpose, a driving curiosity to uncover more of the hidden truths of the universe. One crisp-autumn morning, as I was helping Marcus calibrate some of his more outlandish equipment, my phone buzzed. It was Captain Reeves Blackwood. Her voice was tense. "You've got a situation, multiple reports of strange lights and unexplained phenomena in the Bitterroot National Forest. I need you on this." I exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded gravely. "I'm on my way," I told Blackwood. As I gathered my gear, Marcus pressed a small, intricately carved stone into my hand for protection, he said, and to help you see what others might miss. I arrived at the Bitterroot Rangers station an hour later. The atmosphere was charged with nervous energy. Rangers and local law enforcement milled about, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. Captain Blackwood pulled me aside. "I'm glad you're here, Blackwood. This one's weird even by our standards." She filled me in on the details, hikers and campers reporting strange lights in the sky, unexplained sounds, and in one case, a claim of missing time. Forest Service drones had captured footage of unusual energy readings and electromagnetic anomalies. "Sounds like we might have a tear in the veil," I murmured more to myself than to Reeves. She raised an eyebrow. "What now?" I shook my head. "Nothing, just thinking out loud." "Why do you need me?" Reeves pointed to a map. "We've got search teams covering most of the affected area, but there's a section here that's particularly rugged. I want you to take a look." I nodded, going to the stone Marcus had given me. As I headed out into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something far beyond a routine search and rescue operation. The forest was unnaturally quiet as I made my way deeper into the wilderness. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just an oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. As I crested a small rise, I saw it. A shimmering curtain of light hanging in the air like a tear in the fabric of reality itself. Through it I could catch glimpses of somewhere else, a place of impossible colors and geometries that made my head hurt to look at directly. I reached for my radio, then hesitated. What would I even say? How could I explain this to Reeves or anyone else? Before I could decide, a figure stepped through the tier. For a moment, my heart leapt, thinking it might be Laura. But no, this was someone or something else entirely. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin shimmered with a metallic sheen, and its eyes were pools of swirling galaxies. When it spoke, its voice resonated in my mind rather than my ears. "Greetings, Seeker. We've been expecting you." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. What are you?" The being's form rippled as if struggling to maintain cohesion in our reality. "We are the Watchers, guardians of the cosmic tapestry. Your friend, the one you knew as Laura, sent us." A mix of emotions washed over me, relief that Laura still existed in some form, awe at the being before me, and a healthy dose of fear. "Why are you here?" The balance shifts once more. New threads must be woven into the tapestry. "You have a role to play, Orson Blackwood." The being extended a hand, offering what looked like a small glowing seed. "Will you accept the mantle of guardian to walk between worlds and protect the veil?" I stared at the seed, my mind racing. This was it. A chance to fully embrace the hidden world. I glimpsed being part of something greater than myself, but with me leaving behind everything I'd known, stepping into a realm of uncertainty and wonder. In that moment, I thought of all the search and rescue missions I'd been on, of the lives I'd helped save. I thought of the awe I'd felt standing before the arc of the vast interconnected universe Laura had become part of. I made my decision and reached out. I took the seed as it touched my skin, warmth spread through my body, and I felt my perception expanding. The forest around me came alive with hidden energies and unseen connections. The watcher nodded, a sense of approval radiating from its otherworldly form. The journey began. Learn, grow, protect. We will be watching. With that, it stepped back through the tier, which sealed itself behind it. I stood alone in the forest, the seed pulsing gently in my hand, filled with a sense of both trepidation and excitement for what lay ahead. I knew my life would never be the same. There would be challenges, dangers I couldn't even imagine, but there would also be wonders beyond belief, truths that would reshape my understanding of reality itself. As I made my way back to the ranger station, my mind already formulating a cover story for what I'd encountered, I smiled to myself. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it. The hunt for truth, for understanding, for balance. It had only just begun, and I, Orson Blackwood, former search and rescue officer turned cosmic guardian, was eager to see where it would lead. 1993, I was living out of my beat-up old car. Not the best life plan, I know. Well, when you've been laid off from 3 different jobs in 2 years, you start thinking that maybe stability is overrated. A little unpredictability can keep things interesting. Or so I kept telling myself while I ate canned beans and slept on a foam mattress in the back of my 1986 Ford Escort. My name's Joel Ransom. Funny, right? A guy with no steady job, no permanent home, no one to care if he got snatched off the street. I was a freelance mechanic back then, picking up odd jobs wherever my car burnt down, which, given the state of that car, was pretty often. That was also a kind of freedom I couldn't complain about too much. No rent, no boss breathing down my neck, just me and the road. With my one rule, never stay in one place too long. That rule worked well for me until I found myself deep in the backwoods of Kentucky, somewhere around the Daniel Boone National Forest. I stopped for gas in a little town called Hayfield, and one of the locals mentioned there was a junkyard nearby that paid well for scrap metal. Junkyards were gold mines for me. I could usually fix up an old alternator or strip an engine for parts, flip it for some cash, and be on my way before anyone even knew I was there. So that's where I was heading, or at least that's where I thought I was heading. GPS didn't exactly work out in that part of the world, and I'm no master of reading road signs when they're covered in moss and rust. After about an hour of winding through dirt roads, my engine started making a noise. An expensive noise. I pulled over to pop the hood, and that's when I saw it. My radiator was leaking fluid all over the dirt, steaming like the car was about to melt into the ground. A quick patch-up job could get me a few more miles, I figured, so I started working on it. It's when I noticed something strange. At first it was just a smell, something like wet dog, but worse, mixed with iron, maybe blood. I couldn't place it, but it was strong enough to make me pause. Then I heard movement, slow, deliberate movement, like something big trying to stay quiet. I stood up looking around the dense trees surrounding the road. No wind, no birds, the whole place had gone, still like the forest was holding its breath. Now, I'd been in plenty of sketchy situations, lived through a couple of mugging attempts in Chicago, narrowly escaped a bar fight in Nevada. But this was different. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt this weird pressure like the air itself was thickening around me. Still, I wasn't about to run from a smell and some rustling leaves. Not yet. Anyway, I grabbed my wrench, mostly for show, and called out into the trees. Maybe it was a bear or a coyote, I thought, something I could scare off if I made enough noise. That's when I saw it. It stepped out from between 2 trees about 30 yards ahead. I say stepped, but the movement was all wrong, too smooth, too intentional. At first glance, I thought it was a big wolf, but No wolf stands on two legs, and no wolf has arms like that. Long, muscular, covered in matted fur, but shaped more like human limbs than anything I'd ever seen on four paws. Its head was something else entirely, a broad, flat snout like a hyena's, but with a row of jagged teeth that gleamed, catching just enough light through the trees to make me freeze in place. And then it snarled. I've always hated people who freeze in horror movies, the ones who see something terrifying and just stand there waiting to be eaten. Well, turns out that's exactly what you do when something that looks like it came out of a nightmare steps out of the shadows. Your brain just stops working for a second, maybe longer. By the time my body started listening to my brain again, the thing had taken 2 steps closer. I backed up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. And then, like the worst possible timing in the history of bad timing, the wrench slipped out of my sweaty hand and clattered to the ground. That was all it needed. It charged. I'm not what you'd call a fast runner. Let's just say years of gas station food and truck stop coffee haven't exactly done wonders for my cardiovascular health. But that day I ran like I was 15 pounds lighter and had a chance at the Olympics. I could hear it behind me, its footsteps heavy and fast, tearing through the underbrush like a freight train. The car was about 20 feet away. I didn't even look back, just threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it, like a locked door was going to stop that thing. Still, it was the only plan I had for a second. I thought maybe it had given up. The woods went silent again. I couldn't hear anything but my own breath coming in, short, panicked gasps. I was about to relax, tell myself it was all in my head, when the entire car rocked sideways. It had jumped on the roof. I'm not proud of the scream I let out in that moment. Also not proud of the fact that I pissed myself a little. But if you had a 300-pound monster trying to peel the roof off your car like a sardine can, you'd probably do the same. I fumbled for the keys, started the engine, and slammed on the gas. The wheels spun in the dirt for a second before catching and the car lurched forward. For a brief, glorious moment, I thought I was home free. Then the back window shattered. I'm not sure if it was adrenaline or pure dumb luck that kept me from driving off the road. I floored it, swerving down the narrow path while the thing clawed at the metal roof, tearing off pieces of the car like it was made of tin foil. So I could hear its claws scraping against the metal trying to get inside. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. I didn't slow down, I didn't even look back, I just drove until the road finally spat me out onto a highway, and even then I didn't stop. Not until I reached a gas station on the outskirts of the next town. When I got out, the first thing I noticed was that my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key to lock the car. The second thing I noticed was the claw marks, deep, jagged scratches running across the roof, the hood, even the doors. The back window was completely smashed in, and inside there was something wet on the seats, blood, and not mine. I didn't want to know where it came from. I went inside the gas station, still shaking, and asked the guy behind the counter if there was a mechanic nearby. He didn't even look up from his magazine when he told me the nearest garage was 30 miles away. So I bought a soda, sat in my car, and just tried to breathe. That night I parked in a motel lot, locked the doors, and slept in the front seat. Yeah, I had enough cash for a room, but after what I'd seen, there was no way I was sleeping in a bed surrounded by 4 walls. At least in the car I could see all my exits. As I sat there trying to make sense of what had happened, my mind kept replaying the encounter, the creature's impossible shape, its inhuman movements, the raw power it had displayed in tearing apart my car. What the hell was that thing, and why had it attacked me? I'd heard stories. Of course, every small town has its local legends, its campfire tales, but I'd always dismissed them as just that, stories. Now I wasn't so sure. The thing I'd seen in those woods wasn't just some oversized wolf or bear. It was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every sound, Every shadow made me jump. I kept expecting to see those gleaming teeth, those inhuman eyes peering at me through the car windows. But nothing came by the time dawn broke. I was exhausted, my nerves frayed to the breaking point as I watched the sunrise casting long shadows across the parking lot. I made a decision. I needed answers. And to get them, I'd have to go back to Hayfield, back to those woods. The very thought made my stomach churn, but I knew I couldn't just drive away and pretend it never happened. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there, and I had a feeling it wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, against every instinct screaming at me to get the hell out of Kentucky, I drove my battered car to the nearest body shop. The mechanic, a balmy guy named Hank, took one look at the damage and let out a low whistle. "What in God's name did you hit, son?" he asked, running his hand over the deep gouges in the metal. I hesitated, then decided on a half-truth. Something big in the woods near Hayfield. Hank's eyes narrowed. "Hayfield," he said, "by the old Brennan property." I shrugged, not knowing the area well enough to confirm or deny, but Hank's reaction piqued my curiosity. "You know something about what's out there?" He glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening, then leaned in close. "Listen, boy, there's things in those woods that ain't natural, things that have been there longer than any of us. My advice, get your car fixed and keep on driving. Don't look back." His words sent a chill down my spine, confirming my worst fears. Whatever I'd encountered wasn't just some freak of nature. It was something known, something that had been haunting these parts for who knows how long. But instead of scaring me off, Hank's warning only strengthened my resolve. I needed to know more. As he worked on patching up my car, I asked around town, trying to gather any information I could about the area and its history. Most folks clammed up as soon as I mentioned the woods near Hayfield. But in a dingy bar on the outskirts of town, I struck gold. An old-timer, 3 sheets to the wind and loose lift, started rambling about the Brennan beast. According to him, back in the 1800s, a trapper named Brennan had gone into those woods and never came out. Months later, livestock started disappearing from nearby farms. Then the attacks were brutal, the bodies torn apart in ways that no normal animal could manage. They say all Brennan made a deal with the devil out there. The old man slurred, his rheumy eyes unfocused, traded his soul for the power to survive in the wilderness. But the devil, he's a tricky one, turned Brennan into something else, something hungry. I listened, captivated and horrified in equal measure. It sounded like the kind of tall tale you'd expect in a place like this. But after what I'd seen, I couldn't dismiss it so easily. By the time Hank finished with my car, I had made up my mind. I was going back to those woods, not just to satisfy my curiosity, but because I felt a responsibility. If this thing, this Brennan beast, was real and still out there, how many more unsuspecting travelers might fall victim to it? As I pulled out of the body shop, Hank gave me one last warning. Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. Some things are best left alone. But I couldn't leave it alone, not now. I had to know the truth, even if it killed me. Little did I know, as I pointed my car back towards Hayfield, just how close to death I would come. The drive back to Hayfield felt like a descent into madness. Every mile marker, every bend in the road seemed to whisper, "Turn back." But I pressed on my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes constantly darting to the rear-view mirror. I reached the town just as dusk was settling in, casting long shadows across the empty streets. It looked even more desolate than I remembered. A ghost town clinging to life at the edge of the wilderness. I pulled into the same gas station where this whole nightmare had started. The attendant, a wiry guy with a permanent scowl, eyed me suspiciously as I approached to fill her up. I said, trying to keep my voice steady, and I was wondering if you could point me towards the old Brennan property. The man's face darkened. "Ain't nothing out there but trouble, stranger." "Let's be on your way," I pressed, showing him a wad of cash. I can make it worth your while." He hesitated, then snatched the money. "Your funeral," he muttered, scribbling directions on a scrap of paper. As I drove out of town following the crude map, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees leaned larger, their branches reached out like gnarled fingers scraping against the sides of my car. I found the turnoff, little more than a dirt track, disappearing into the undergrowth. My headlights barely penetrated the gloom as I inched forward, every bump and rattle making me flinch. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I came to a clearing. In the center stood the remains of what must have been the Brennan cabin. Time and the elements had reduced it to little more than a pile of rotting timber, but I could still make out the basic shape of a small homestead. I parked the car, leaving the engine running and the headlights on, illuminating the clearing and casting harsh white light. As I stepped out, the silence hit me like a physical force. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. I approached the ruins cautiously, my flashlight beam dancing over weathered wood and rusted metal. Something crunched under my foot, and I looked down to see I was standing on a scatter of bones, animal bones. I told myself, trying to ignore the sick feeling in my gut. As I neared the cabin, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Something dark darted between two fallen beams. I swung my flashlight toward it, heart pounding, nothing. I took another step, and suddenly the ground gave way beneath me. I fell tumbling through rotted floorboards into what must have been a root cellar or storm shelter. I hit the earth and floor hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me and sending my flashlight spinning away into darkness. For a moment I lay there, dazed and winded. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once I scrambled for my flashlight, my fingers scrabbling in the dirt just as my hand closed around it. Something heavy landed behind me. With a dull thud, I whirled around, clicking on the light, and found myself face to face with the creature from the road. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural yellow light reflecting my flashlight beam. Like a cat's saliva dripped from its massive jaws, each tooth as long as my finger. The stench of rotting meat and wet fur filled the enclosed space, making me gag. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, neither moving. Then slowly, deliberately, it began to change. The fur seemed to ripple and recede, the snout shortening, the limbs twisting and reshaping themselves. Where the beast had stood, there was now a man or something that looked like a man. His skin was pale and waxy, his eyes sunken but still glowing with that eerie yellow light. When he spoke, his voice was a raspy whisper like dead leaves scraping across stone. "Welcome, stranger," he said, lips peeling back in a grotesque approximation of a smile. "I've been waiting for you to return." Chapter 6, Face to Face with the Beast. My mind reeled, unable to process what I was seeing. The creature, the man before me, defied all logic, all understanding of the natural world. Yet here he stood, as real and solid as the earth beneath my feet. "Who? What are you?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. The thing that had been the beast chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "I am Brennan," he said, confirming the old drug story, or what's left of him at least. I struggled to find words. My thoughts were a chaotic jumble of fear and disbelief. But that's impossible. The story, it happened over 100 years ago. Brennan's yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness. Time means little to one such as I. I've walked these woods for generations, hunting, feeding, waiting, and now you've come back to me. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want from me?" Brennan took a step closer, his movements fluid and predatory. "What do I want? I want what I've always wanted, to survive, to thrive, and you, my friend, you're gonna help me do just that." I backed away, my back pressing against the earth and wall of the cellar. I don't understand. Of course you don't, Brennan said, his voice almost pitying. How could you? You're just a man, but I am so much more. The deal I made all those years ago gave me power beyond imagining, but it came with a price, a hunger that can never be truly sated. As he spoke, I noticed changes rippling across his skin, patches of fur sprouting and receding, his features shifting subtly between human and beast. It was as if the two forms were constantly at war within him. I've lived off the land for decades. He continued, animals, the occasional hiker or camper, but it's not enough. Never enough. I need more. A horrible realization began to dawn on me. We want to leave the forest, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Brandon's face split into a grin, revealing teeth that were far too sharp to be human. Smart boy. Yes. I want to leave to hunt in the cities where the prey is plentiful and unsuspecting, but I can't. The deal binds me to these woods unless what I asked, though I dreaded the answer, unless someone willingly takes my place, Brennan said. His eyes boring into someone like you, Joel Ransom. The use of my name sent a jolt of fear through me. How do we know? But of course he must have gone through my core while I was unconscious. I won't do it, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I'd rather die. Brennan laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Oh, you misunderstand, I'm not giving you a choice. The ritual has already begun. From the moment you set foot in my domain, your fate was sealed. All that remains is for you to embrace it. As he spoke, I became aware of a strange sensation spreading through my body. A tingling that started in my fingertips and toes, slowly creeping up my limbs. I looked down in horror to see fur beginning to sprout on the backs of my hands. No, I gasped, panic rising in my throat. This can't be happening. Fight it if you wish, Brennan said, watching my transformation with a mixture of curiosity and satisfaction. But in the end, you'll give in. They all do. I closed my eyes, concentrating with all my might on remaining human, on Joel Ransom, the drifter, the mechanic, not this thing I was becoming. For a moment, the tingling sensation receded. Barnon's eyes narrowed. Interesting, you're stronger than most, but would one matter? In the end, the hunger will consume you just as it did me. As if on cue, a wave of ravenous hunger swept over me. My stomach clenched and I could suddenly smell everything, the rich, loamy scent of the earth around us, the musty odor of rotting wood, and underneath it all, the tantalizing aroma of fresh meat, Brennan's. I shook my head violently, trying to clear it. I won't become a monster, I growled through gritted teeth. You already are, Brennan replied softly. You just don't know it. Yet time seemed to lose all meaning in that dark cellar. I don't know how long I fought against the transformation, against the hunger that gnawed at my insides. Hours, days. It felt like an eternity. Brennan watched it all with an air of patient amusement, occasionally offering words of encouragement or mockery. That's it. Embrace the change. Let the beast out. But I clung to my humanity with every ounce of willpower I possessed. I thought of my life on the road, of the people I'd met, the places I'd seen. I focused on the simple pleasures. A cold beer on a hot day, the purr of a well-tuned engine, the open highway stretching out before me, anything to keep the monster at bay. The pain was excruciating. My bones felt like they were trying to reshape themselves, my skin alternately burning and freezing. And more than once I found myself on all fours, panting and retching, fur rippling across my body only to recede moments later. Through it all, the hunger grew stronger. My senses sharpened to an almost unbearable degree. I could hear Brendan's heartbeat, smell the blood pumping through his veins. Part of me, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, wanted nothing more than to tear into him, to feast on his flesh and blood. You're only prolonging the inevitable, Brendan said. his voice a mixture of admiration and frustration. Give in, the pain will stop, the hunger will be satisfied. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. I feared that if I opened my mouth, it would be to sink newly sharpened teeth into his throat. As another wave of pain racked my body, I caught sight of my reflection in a puddle on the cellar floor. My face was a horrifying blend of human and animal features, my eyes glowing with the same eerie yellow light as Brennan's. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Brennan must have sensed it, because he pressed his advantage. Think of the power you'll have, he heard. The freedom, no more scraping by, living hand to mouth. You'll be the apex predator feared by all. The offer was tempting. I can't deny it. In that moment of weakness, I could see the appeal. Never be hungry or cold again. Have the strength to take whatever I wanted, and be free from the constraints of human society. But then I thought of the cost. The lives I would have to take to sustain myself, the monster I would become. And I knew I couldn't do it. With a roar that was half human, half beast, I launched myself at Brennan. He was caught off guard, clearly not expecting me to have any fight left in me. Rimmed down in a tangle of limbs rolling across the earth and floor. I had the element of surprise, but Brennan had over a century of experience as a predator. He quickly gained the upper hand, pinning me to the ground. With inhuman strength, his face, inches from mine, began to elongate into a snout, razor-sharp teeth snapping at my throat. "Oh," he snarled. "You could have had everything. Now you'll die and I'll take your body for my own." As his jaws descended towards my neck, something inside me snapped. Not the last vestiges of my humanity as I had feared, but something else, something primal and powerful. In that moment, I understood. The transformation wasn't about giving in to the beast. It was about mastering it. With a surge of strength I didn't know I possessed, I threw Brennan off me. As I rose to my feet, I felt my body changing, growing, but this time I was in control. I was both man and beast, and neither. Something new. Brennan's eyes widened in shock and fear. "Impossible," he whispered. I smiled, feeling my new fangs with my tongue. "You're right, Brennan. I am a monster, but I'm not your monster." And with that, I attacked. The fight that followed was like nothing I could have imagined. We crashed through the rotty walls of the cellar, emerging into the moonlit clearing. Our bodies shifted and changed as we battled, sometimes more human, sometimes more beast, always deadly. Brennan was strong, his movements honed by decades of hunting, but he was also desperate and afraid. He could sense that things had not gone according to his plan, that the power he had hoped to gain was slipping through his fingers. I, on the other hand, felt more alive than I ever had. Every sense was heightened, every muscle coiled with power, and beneath it all, a core of humanity that I refused to relinquish. It gave me a strength that Brennan, for all his inhuman abilities, couldn't match. We tore at each other with claws and fangs, slamming into trees hard enough to splinter trunks. The forest around us came alive, with the sounds of our combat animals fleeing in terror from the clash of monsters in their midst. As we fought, I began to understand more about what I had become. I wasn't just a man who could turn into a beast, or a beast wearing a man's skin. I was something in between, something that could harness the strengths of both forms without succumbing to the weaknesses of either. Brennan, for all his years of experience, had never achieved this balance. He was still at war with himself, the human and animal sides constantly vying for control. It made him powerful, but it also made him vulnerable. As the fight wore on, I could sense Brennan weakening. His attacks became more frenzied, more desperate. He knew he was losing, and the fear of what that meant drove him to new heights of savagery. "You don't understand what you're doing." He snarled between attacks. "If you kill me, you'll be trapped here forever." "Is that what you want? to be bound to these woods for eternity. I paused, considering his words. Was that to be my fate? To take his place as the monster in the forest, feared by locals hunting unsuspecting travelers? The thought chilled me to my core. Brennan, seeing my hesitation, pressed his advantage. "Let me go," he pleaded. "He'll leave this place. Never return." Brennan launched himself at me one last time, but I was ready. As we collided, I used his own momentum against him, twisting in midair to slam him into the ground before he could recover, my jaws closing around his throat. I felt the life drain out of him, his body shuddering and then going still. As he died, something passed between us. Knowledge, power, the weight of the curse he had borne for so long. I understood then that I had been right. I was bound to this place, now tasked with guarding it against those who would abuse its power. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the trees, I felt the beast within me recede. I looked down at my hands, human once more, stained with Brennan's blood. The enormity of what had happened, of what I had become, washed over me. I made my way back to my car, my mind reeling. I couldn't stay here, not yet. I needed time to come to terms with my new reality, to learn to control the power that now coursed through my veins, but I knew I would return. This forest was a part of me now, for better or worse. As I drove away from Hayfield, watching the trees recede in my rearview mirror, I made a vow I would master this curse, find a way to use it for good rather than evil, and someday, somehow, I would find a way to break it altogether. But from here, the road called to me. There were others out there like Brennan, other dark things lurking in forgotten corners of the world, and now I had the power to face them. John Ransom the Drifter was gone. In his place was something new, something that straddled the line between man and beast, between protector and predator. As I pointed my car towards the rising sun, I couldn't help but smile. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but then again, I'd always had a taste for adventure. I was elbow deep in the guts of a '98 Chevy when Max sauntered into my garage, that cocky grin plastered across his face. It was mid-July 2004, and the Arkansas heat was making the air shimmer above the asphalt outside Bryan. My man Max called out, "Got a minute?" I wiped my greasy hands on a rag and straightened up my back. "Hopping and protesting depends on what you're selling," I replied, eyeing him warily. Max and I had a complicated history. We'd known each other since high school, but we'd never been what you'd call close. After graduation, when most of our classmates scattered to the winds, Max stuck around our sleepy little town. Over time, we developed a friendship of sorts, built on shared beers and the occasional weekend adventure. Max was the outdoorsy type, all tanned skin and sun-bleached hair. I was more comfortable with engines than evergreens, but Max had a way of pushing me out of my comfort zone for better or worse. "Not selling anything, buddy," Max said, leaning against a workbench. "But I did just pick up a sweet new ride." He jangled a set of keys in front of me. "Brand new. Thought we could take her out for a proper test drive this weekend." I raised an eyebrow, and by test drive you mean camping trip, Max exclaimed, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "Ozark National Forest, just you, me, and the great outdoors. What do you say?" I hesitated. The last thing I wanted to do was spend my weekend sweating mosquitoes and sleeping on the ground. As I looked at Max in the face, I felt a twinge of guilt. How many weekends had I spent cooped up in this garage tinkering with engines while life passed me by? "Come on, Brian," Max pressed. "When's the last time you did something? Just for the hell of it. Live a little." I sighed, knowing I was going to regret this. "Fine," I conceded. "But if I would get eaten by a bear, I'm coming back to haunt you." Max laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. "That's the spirit. Trust me, it'll be great. We'll fish, hike, maybe even see some wildlife. You won't regret it." As Max rattled off the details of our upcoming trip, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't quite dread, not yet, just a vague sense of unease like the distant rumble of thunder before a storm. I had no way of knowing then, but that feeling was my first warning. I should have listened to it. I should have stayed home, buried myself in work, done anything but agree to that damn camping trip. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded along, cracking jokes about mosquito repellent and bear spray. I even found myself getting a little excited as Max described the beauty of the Ozarks. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Maybe a little time away from the shop was exactly what I needed. God, how wrong I was. As Max left the garage waving goodbye and promising to pick me up early Friday morning, I turned back to the Chevy. The engine seemed to mock me. Its exposed parts a jumble of metal and wires. For a moment I envied its simplicity. Engines made sense, they followed rules. We put the right parts in the right places, and they worked. The world outside my garage wasn't nearly so predictable, and I was about to be reminded of that fact in the most horrifying way possible. I spent the rest of the week preparing for the trip, digging out old camping gear from the back of my closet and making a run to the local sporting goods store for supplies. By the time Friday rolled around, I had almost convinced myself that this might actually be fun. The morning of our departure, I stood on my front porch, duffel bag at my feet, watching the sun creep over the horizon. The air was already thick with humidity, promising another scorcher of a day. As I waited for Max, I took a deep breath, savoring the familiar smells of oil and grease that clung to my skin despite a thorough shower. It would be the last time I'd smell anything normal for a long, long time. The rumble of Max's new truck announced his arrival. Before I saw him, he'd pulled up in the Ford's glossy black paint gleaming in the early morning light. Ready for an adventure, Max called out, grinning from ear to ear. I hoisted my bag into the truck bed and climbed into the passenger seat. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, buckling up. As we pulled away from my house, leaving behind the familiar streets of our town, I had no idea that we were driving towards something that would change us forever. Something that lurked in the depths of those woods, waiting, something hungry. The drive to Ozark National Forest took about 3 hours. Max filled the time with excited chatter about the camping spot. He picked out some secluded area he swore was primo real estate. I half listened as the landscape changed from small towns to rolling hills to dense forest. As we entered the park, the trees seemed to close in around us. The road narrowed, winding deeper into the woods. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being swallowed whole. Almost there, Max announced, turning onto a bumpy dirt road. The truck jolted and bounced, branches scraping against the sides. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into a small clearing. Home sweet home. Max declared, killing the engine. I stepped out of the truck, my boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air was thick and heavy, filled with the buzzing of insects and the occasional bird call, but underneath it all was a strange stillness, as if the forest was holding its breath. We set up camp quickly, working together to pitch the tents and gather firewood. As the sun began to set, Max got a fire going while I unpacked our cooler of food and beer. "This is the life, huh?" Max said, cracking open a beer and settling into a folding chair. No cell phones, no work, just us and nature. I nodded, trying to shake off my unease. "Yeah, it's something all right." As night fell, the forest came alive with new sounds. The hoot of an owl, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Max insisted on telling ghost stories, spinning yarns about hikers who'd gone missing in these very woods. "Knock it off," I grumbled, tossing an empty beer can at him. "I don't need that crap in my head out here." Max laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Oh, come on, Brian, don't tell me you're scared of a few campfire stories." I was about to retort when a smell hit me, something rancid and sickly sweet. "You smell it?" I asked, wrinkling my nose. Max sniffed the air, his brow furrowing. Yeah, probably just a dead animal, something, nothing to worry about. As we sat there, the stench grew stronger, and with it came a silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. The night creatures had gone quiet, leaving only crackle of our fire. Maybe we should turn in, I suggested. Suddenly, eager to be in the relative safety of my tent, Max nodded, his earlier bravado dimming. Yeah, good idea. Big day of hiking tomorrow. As I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. It was just my imagination running wild, fueled by Mac's stupid stories and too much beer. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. And as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I could have sworn I woke to the sound of Max cursing, unzipping my tent. I stumbled out to find him standing at the edge of our campsite, staring into the woods. What's going on? I asked. Rubbing sleep from my eyes, Max turned his face pale. Something got into our food last night. Coolers destroyed. I followed him to where we left our supplies. The heavy-duty cooler lay on its side, deep gouges scored across its surface. Our food was scattered everywhere, packaging torn to shreds, bare. I suggested the claw marks looked wrong, too long, too widely spaced. Max shook his head. I don't know, but look at this. He pointed to a set of tracks leading away from the campsite. They were like nothing I'd ever seen, massive, with elongated toes, ending in what must have been wickedly sharp claws. What the hell made those? I whispered, a chill running down my spine despite the morning heat. Before Max could answer, a scream tore through the forest. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, raw and primal, filled with pain and rage. He echoed off the trees, seeming to come from everywhere. At once we both froze, staring wide-eyed into the woods. The scream faded, leaving behind a silence so complete. It was deafening. We need to leave, I said, already moving towards the tents. Now for once, Max didn't argue. He packed up in record time, shoving gear haphazardly into bags in the truck bed. Just as we were about to leave, Max stopped. Wait, he said, reaching into the cab. He emerged with a hunting knife, its blade glinting in the morning sun, just in case. I wanted to laugh at the idea of a knife being any use against whatever had made those tracks. But the laughter died in my throat as movement caught my eye there. Just beyond the tree line, something massive shifted in the shadows. For a split second, I saw a hulking form that had fur and eyes that reflected the light like polished coins. Then it was gone, melting back into the forest with impossible speed for its size. Did you see that? I gasped, grabbing Max's arm. He nodded, his face ashen. We need to go now. We scrambled into the truck, Max gunning the engine before I'd even closed my door. As we tore down the dirt road, I kept my eyes glued to the side mirror, half expecting to see that thing burst from the trees in pursuit. But nothing followed us, at least nothing we could see. We drove in tense silence for nearly an hour before Max finally spoke. What the hell was that thing? He asked, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I shook my head. I don't know, but it wasn't natural, Max. Nothing that big should be able to move that fast. As the adrenaline began to wear off, my mind raced with questions. What had we stumbled into? Or why hadn't we heard about any dangerous animals in the area? We stopped at a small general store on the outskirts of the forest, needing gas and a moment to collect ourselves. As Max filled up the truck, I went inside to pay and grab some much-needed coffee. The store was empty except for an old man behind the counter. He eyed me suspiciously as I approached. You boys been camping up in the forest? He asked, his voice gravelly with age. I nodded, surprised. How'd you know? He gestured to my mudcake boots and the wide-eyed spooked look I'm sure I was wearing. Seen it before. So let me guess you had an encounter. My blood ran cold. Who you mean? The old man sighed, leaning across the counter. Listen, son, them woods ain't safe. There's something in there, something old and mean. Folks around here know better than to go poking around where they ain't welcome. Why isn't there any warning signs or something? I demanded. He shrugged truisms about all we got left. Can't be scaring folks away with tales of monsters, can we? Sides. Most people camp in the safe areas.
You boys must have gone off the beaten path.
I thought of Mac's Primo campsite and felt sick. What? What is it, the thing in the woods? The old man shook his head, and no one knows for sure. Some say it's a spirit, angry at folks trespassing on sacred land. Others think it's some kind of animal left over from prehistoric times. For me, I don't much care what it is, I just know it's best left alone. As I paid for the gas and coffee, the old man grabbed my arm. Word of advice, son, get as far away from here as you can, and whatever you don't, go back into them woods. Some things, once they get the scent of you, they don't let go easy. I nodded, mumbling thanks. As I hurried out of the store, Max was waiting in the truck, looking impatient. What took so long, he asked. As I climbed in, I hesitated, then told him everything the old man had said. Max listened in silence, his face growing more troubled with each word. So what do we do now? He asked. When I finished, I took a deep breath. We go home. We forget about this whole thing. Max nodded slowly. Yeah, okay. As we pulled back onto the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't going to be that simple. The old man's warning echoed in my head. Some things, once they get the scent of you, they don't let go easy. I just hoped we hadn't already been marked. The next few weeks passed in a haze of normalcy that felt almost surreal. After our experience in the woods, I threw myself back into work, spending long hours at the garage trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythms of engines and oil changes. Max and I didn't talk much. When we did see each other, there was an unspoken agreement not to mention what had happened. It was easier to pretend it had all been some shared hallucination, a bad dream brought on by too much beer and ghost stories. But the nightmares wouldn't let me forget. Night after night, I jolt awake, drenched in sweat, the echo of that inhuman scream ringing in my ears. In my dreams, I was always running through endless dark woods, something massive and hungry, always just a step behind. It was about a month after our trip when things started to get weird. At first, it was little things, tools going missing in the garage, only to turn up in strange places, a constant feeling of being watched, even when I was alone. Then came the smell, that same rancid, sickly, sweet stench from the forest, suddenly permeating my house, my clothes, my skin. No amount of cleaning or air freshener seemed to get rid of it. I tried to rationalize it all away. Stress, lack of sleep, and overactive imagination, but deep down I knew better. Whatever we encountered in those woods, it wasn't done with us. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. I was working late at the garage trying to finish up a transmission job. The radio was on, playing some old country song when suddenly it cut out, replaced by static and then barely audible beneath the white noise. I heard it, that scream, the same one from the forest, filled with rage and hunger. I dropped my wrench, stumbling back from the car I'd been working on. The static grew louder, the scream with it, until it felt like my head would explode from the noise. And as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The radio clicked back to the country station as if nothing had happened. With shaking hands, I locked up the garage and drove straight to Max's place. He opened the door looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually neat appearance disheveled. You've been hearing it too, haven't you? I asked without preamble. Max nodded, stepping aside to let me in. His apartment was a mess, empty beer cans and takeout containers littering every surface. I thought I was going crazy, he said, collapsing onto his couch. I keep seeing things, Brian shadows moving when they shouldn't, and that smell... I know, I said, sitting across from him. It's following us. Max... Whatever that thing was, it's not letting go. Max ran a hand through his greasy hair. But what do we do? I took a deep breath, I think we need to go back. Max's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you insane? That thing will kill us, maybe, I admitted, but if we don't, it's just gonna keep haunting us. We need to face it. Max, send us one way or another. For a long moment, Max was silent. Then slowly he nodded. You're right. God helped me, but you're right. When do we leave tomorrow? I said already, dreading what was to come. Well, leave at first light. As I drove home that night, preparing for what might be our last trip into those cursed woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking willingly into the lion's den. That we had no choice. Whatever had marked us that day in the forest, it wasn't going to let us go without a fight, and the fight was exactly what we were going to give it. The drive back to Ozark National Forest was tense and silent. Max gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. While I obsessively checked and rechecked our supplies, we brought everything we could think of. Flashlights, extra batteries, a first aid kit, Max's hunting knife, and even an old revolver Max had inherited from his grandfather. The forest seemed to close in around us as we drove deeper, the trees pressed close to the road as if trying to block our path. By the time we reached the clearing where we camped before, the sun was already sinking below the tree line, casting long shadows across the ground. We set up camp quickly, neither of us wanting to be caught unprepared. When night fell, darkness crept in. We sat by our fire, weapons close at hand, waiting. Hours passed, the night grew deeper, and the sounds of the forest faded into an eerie silence. Just when I was beginning to think we'd made a mistake, that there was nothing out there after all, we heard it, a twig snapping somewhere in the darkness beyond our firelight. And another, closer this time. Max and I were on our feet in an instant, backs to the fire, peering into the gloom. The smell hit us, then that same rotten, sickly sweet stench we'd been haunted by for weeks. Show yourself, shouted his voice, cracking with fear and bravado. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly a shape began to emerge from the shadows. It was just as I remembered, massive, covered in matted fur with a misshapen head. There was all room for any animal I knew. But seeing it clearly for the first time, I realized it was even more horrifying than I'd imagined. Its body was a patchwork of different animal parts, as if someone had stitched together a bear, a wolf, and something else entirely. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence, fixed on us with predatory intensity. What are you? I whispered, unable to look away from the monstrosity before us. To our shock, it spoke. The voice that came from its twisted maw was deep and guttural, barely recognizable as speech. I am hunger, it growled. I am the forest rage in you, your prey. With that, it lunged forward with impossible speed. Max fired the revolver, the sound deafening in the quiet forest. The creature staggered but didn't fall. A roar of pain and fury tore from its throat. Run, I yelled, grabbing Max's arm and pulling him towards the truck. We sprinted through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces as we ran blindly in the dark. Behind us, we could hear the creature crashing through the forest, its howls of rage growing closer with each passing second. We burst out of the tree line onto the dirt road. Max reached the truck first, fumbling with the keys. I turned back, ready to make a last stand if necessary, only to see the creature emerge from the woods mere feet away. Time seemed to slow as it reared up to its full height, easily 9 feet tall. In that moment, I knew we were gonna die. There was no way we could outrun or overpower this thing. But just as it was about to strike, a gunshot rang out. The creature jerked back, black blood spurting from a wound in its chest. It roared in pain and fury. Turning to face this new threat, I saw a figure step out from behind a tree, the old man from the general store, holding a smoking shotgun. "Get out of here," he yelled at us. "We'll hold it off." We didn't need to be told twice. Max finally got the truck started and I leapt into the passenger seat. As we peeled away, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror, the old man standing his ground as the creature bore down on him. We drove through the night, not stopping until we were miles away from the forest. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what we'd just experienced began to sink in. "What the hell was that thing?" Max asked, his voice shaking. I shook my head, still trying to process it all. "I don't know," I said, "but I don't think we've seen the last of it." The weeks following our second encounter with the creature were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Max and I tried to resume our normal lives, but the weight of what we experienced hung over us like a storm cloud. We scoured the internet for any information about similar sightings or legends in the Ozarks, but found nothing concrete, just vague stories and blurry photos. "That could have been anything," Max said. The local news made no mention of the old man from the general store. It was as if he never existed. One night, about a month after our return, I woke to the sound of scratching at my bedroom window. Heart pounding, I grabbed the baseball bat I'd taken to keeping by my bed and crept to the window, but when I pulled back the curtain, there was nothing there, just the dark street outside, empty and still. As I turned to go back to bed, movement caught my eye. A shadow darker than the night around it, slipping between two houses across the street. It was too big to be human, moving with an unnatural fluidity that made my skin crawl. I called Max the next morning, my voice tight with barely controlled panic. "It's here," I said as soon as he picked up in town. "I saw it last night." There was a long pause before Max responded, his voice hollow. "I know I've been seeing things too, shadows, hearing noises." I thought I was going crazy. We met up at a diner on the edge of town, both of us looking over our shoulders as we talked in hushed voices. The waitress gave us odd looks as she refilled our coffee cups, but we barely noticed. "What do we do now?" Max asked. His normally confident demeanor shattered it. We couldn't run from this thing forever. I shook my head at a loss. "I don't know, but we need help, professional help." That's how we found ourselves a week later, sitting in the cluttered office of Dr. Olivia Reeves, a professor of folklore and mythology at the State University. Wed emailed her a vague description of our experiences, careful not to sound completely unhinged, and she'd agreed to meet with us. Dr. Reeves was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She listened intently as we recounted our story, her expression giving nothing away. When we finished, she sat back in her chair, fingers steepled under her chin. "What you're describing," she said slowly, "sounds like a manifestation of what some cultures call a guardian spirit, a protector of the natural world that's been corrupted or twisted by human influence." "But why is it following us?" I asked. "We didn't do anything to it." Dr. Reeves shook her head. "It's not about what you did. It's about what you represent. You're outsiders, intruders in its territory, and now that it's marked you, it won't stop until it's destroyed you or you've destroyed it." Max leaned forward, his face pale. "How do we destroy something like that?" "It won't be easy," Dr. Reeves warned. "These entities are tied to the land they protect. To truly defeat it, you'd need to sever that connection." She went on to explain an old ritual, a way to bind the creature and cut it off from the source of its power. It would require us to return to the forest one last time to face the thing that had been haunting us. As we left Dr. Reeves' office, clutching notes and a list of supplies we'd need, I felt a mix of dread and determination. This was our chance to end this nightmare once and for all. "Are we really gonna do this?" Max asked as we stood in the parking lot. I looked at him and saw the fear in his eyes that mirrored my own, but Beneath that fear was a steely resolve. We've come too far to back down now. Yeah, I said, Lloyd, we're gonna end this one way or another. We spent the next week preparing, gathering the items Dr. Reeves had told us we'd need for the ritual: salt, iron filing, sacred herbs, and other stranger things. The night before we were set to leave, I stood in my garage looking at the pile of supplies and wondering how the hell I'd ended up here. Just a few months ago, I was a simple mechanic whose biggest worry was making rent. Now I was about to head into the woods to face off against some kind of ancient monstrous spirit. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. We set out at dawn, the truck loaded with our gear. The drive was tense, neither of us spoke much. As we neared the forest, the sky darkened, clouds rolling in as if the very weather was conspiring against us. We parked at the trailhead and started our hike into the woods. The forest seemed different this time, darker, more oppressive. The trees leaned over us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. We reached the clearing where we encountered the creature before and began setting up for the ritual. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the ground, we could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon us. "It's here, Max," whispered his hand, tightening on the iron rod he held. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's do this." We began the ritual reciting the words Dr. Reeves had taught us at first. Nothing happened. Then slowly the air began to thicken, a low hum built in the background. That's when we heard it, that familiar bone-chilling roar. The creature burst from the tree line. More terrifying than ever, its eyes glowed with an unholy light, fixed on us with murderous intent. We stood our ground, continuing the chant. The creature charged, but as it reached the edge of the circle when drawn, it slammed into an invisible barrier. It howled in rage, clawing at the air between us. The forest around us seemed to come alive. The wind whipped into a frenzy. Trees groaned and creaked, the ground itself trembling beneath our feet. Just when I thought we couldn't hold out any longer, there was a flash of blinding light. The creature let out a scream that shook the very air, a sound of agony and defeat. When my vision cleared, the creature was gone. In its place was a small, twisted sapling. Its bark was black and gnarled. We stood there in shocked silence for a long moment, hardly daring to believe it was over. Then slowly the oppressive atmosphere began to lift. The forest felt normal again. Max let out a shaky laugh. "We did it. We actually did it." I nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. "Let's get out of here." As we hiked back to the truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just been part of something much bigger than ourselves. We'd faced an ancient evil and come out the other side. The drive home was quiet. Both of us were lost in our own thoughts. It wasn't until we reached the outskirts of town that Max spoke. "So, what now?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. Now we go back to our lives. We try to forget, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. How could we forget something like this? It had changed us, marked us in ways we were only beginning to understand. As we parted ways that night, I knew our lives would never be the same. We'd seen behind the veil, glimpsed a world most people never knew existed. And while part of me longed for the simple life I'd had before, I couldn't deny the thrill of discovery, the sense that we'd been part of something extraordinary. Who knew what other secrets the world held, what other adventures might be waiting just around the corner? For now, though, I was content to go home, to sleep in my own bed without fear for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring what it would, but tonight we won, would face our fears and come out stronger. Really, isn't that what life's all about? They say the worst thing you can do is trust a stranger, but they never tell you what happens when you can trust the ones you know. That's how I ended up in this damn mess. It was 2003 and I was driving through the back roads of West Virginia, figuring that maybe, just maybe, I could handle the wilderness a bit better than I could handle people. Names like Curtis, Langford, and for as long as I can remember, I've always had a way of finding trouble. The invitation came on Tuesday, I remember, because I was nursing a hangover from Monday night poker, sprawled on my worn-out couch in my dingy apartment in Charleston. The phone rang, piercing through my skull like an ice pick. I groaned, fumbling for the receiver. Yeah, I grunted, not bothering with pleasantries. Curtis, did you? The voice on the other end was familiar, but it took my adult brain a moment to place it. Jim, I sat up, wincing at the movement. Hell, it's been, 2 years? Jim chuckled, a sound crackled over the line. But who's counting? Listen, I've got a proposition for you. I should have known right then that trouble was brewing. Jim's propositions never ended well, not since we were kids, and he convinced me to borrow Old Man Hatcher's boat for a joyride. We ended up capsized in the middle of the lake, grounded for a month. I'm listening, I said against my better judgment. I got this cabin out in Logan County, real nice spot deep in the woods, thought maybe you'd like to come out for a weekend, do some hunting like old times. I hesitated. The last thing I needed was to get wrapped up in one of Jim's schemes. But then again, a weekend away from the city, away from the bills piling up on my kitchen table and the boss breathing down my neck. On our Jim replied, and I could practically hear the grin in his voice, though I can't promise we won't share a bottle or two around the campfire. I sighed already, knowing I was going to regret this. It didn't sound half bad just hunting. I asked suspicious scouts, "All right, I'm in. This weekend I'll text you the directions. And Curtis, pack warm it. Gets cold out here at night." The line went dead and I was left staring at the phone, wondering what I'd just gotten myself into. Jim had always been the adventurous one, the risk taker. Me, I was more of a calculated gamble kind of guy, but something in his voice, a hint of what? Excitement, nervousness. I couldn't quite place it, but it piqued my curiosity. I spent the next few days getting ready, dug out my old hunting gear from the back of the closet, surprised by the musty smell of disuse. It had been years since I'd gone hunting, not since Dad passed. The memories came flooding back as I checked over the rifle, making sure it was clean and in working order. Dad's voice in my ear, teaching me how to track, how to stay downwind, how to make a clean shot. By the time Friday rolled around, I was actually looking forward to the trip. Maybe this was exactly what I needed, a chance to clear my head, reconnect with family, even if that family was Jim. I tossed my duffel bag and rifle case into the bed of my old pickup and hit the road. Jim's hastily scribbled directions were on the passenger seat beside me. The drive took longer than expected as I left the outskirts of Charleston. Behind, the roads narrowed, twisting through hills that seemed to grow steeper with every mile. The forests closed in on either side, thick and dark branches reaching out over the road like grasping fingers. I rolled down the window, letting the crisp autumn air fill the cab. There was a scent on the breeze, something wild and unfamiliar. It set my teeth on edge, though I couldn't say why. As I drove deeper into Logan County, the uneasy feeling grew. The towns I passed through seemed to shrink, become more rundown. Boarded-up storefronts stared out at me like empty eye sockets. The few people I saw on the streets watched my truck pass with wary expressions, as if they knew I didn't belong. I chalked it up to being a city boy out of his element. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, even when there was nothing around but trees and the occasional dilapidated barn. The sun was sinking low on the horizon. When I had finally spotted the turnoff, Jim had described a narrow dirt road, barely more than a trail leading off into the depths of the forest. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to turn around, head back to the safety and familiarity of the city. I hesitated, my hand on the gear shift. But then I thought of Jim waiting for me at that cabin of the weekend ahead, campfires and hunting stories. and the chance to forget my troubles for a while. I shifted into gear and turned onto the road. The truck bounced and jolted over the uneven ground. The trees seemed to close in behind me as I drove, like a door shutting on the outside world. The fading sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting strange shifting shadows across the windshield. I found myself leaning forward, straining to see the path ahead. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I saw a flicker of light through the trees. As I rounded a bend, a cabin came into view. It was smaller than I'd imagined, little more than a one-room shack with a tin roof and a rickety-looking porch. The warm light spilled from the windows and smoke curled from the chimney. I pulled up beside Jim's battered Jeep and cut the engine for a moment. I sat there listening to the tick of the cooling engine and the unfamiliar sounds of the forest at night. Then the cabin door swung open, spaying more light onto the leaf-strewn ground. "Curtis," Jim's voice boomed out startlingly loud in the quiet. "Thought you might have gotten lost out there." I climbed out of the truck, stretching my stiff muscles nearly to the point of doing so. Jim laughed, coming down the porch steps to clap me on the shoulder. "You couldn't have picked a more out-of-the-way spot if you tried." He looked older than I remembered. Lines etched deeper around his eyes and mouth, but his grip was strong as ever as he pulled me into a quick, rough hug. "That's the point," he said, grinning. "Can't have just anyone stumbling onto our little paradise now, can we?" I forced a smile, but something in the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Paradise. This place felt more like the setting of a horror movie than any kind of paradise I could imagine. But I pushed the thought aside. I was here now, might as well make the best. I grabbed my gear from the truck and followed Jim into the cabin, the door creaking shut behind us with a finality that made my stomach lurch. As I crossed the threshold, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something I wouldn't be able to easily walk away from. If only I'd known then how right that feeling was. The inside of the cabin was dimly lit, a single kerosene lamp casting flickering shadows on rough-hewn walls. The air was thick with the scent of wood, smoke, and something else. Something musky and wild that I couldn't quite place. Jim bustled about, clearing a space for my gear and pulling out 2 chipped enamel mugs. "Whiskey?" he asked. Already reaching for a bottle on a makeshift shelf, I nodded, grateful for something to take the edge off. As Jim poured, I took in our surroundings. The cabin was sparse, a pot-bellied stove in one corner, 2 narrow cots against the far wall, a rickety table with mismatched chairs. It wasn't much, but it would do for a weekend. Jim handed me a mug, and the whiskey sloshed dangerously close to the rim. "2 old times," he said, raising his own in a toast. I clinked my mug against his, and the sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet cabin. "2 old times," I echoed, taking a long swallow. The whiskey burned going down, warming me from the inside out. We spent the next few hours catching up, swapping stories about the years we'd been apart. Jim told me about his job at the lumber mill, about the girlfriend who left him for a guy from Huntington. I filled him in on my string of dead-end jobs and my failed attempts at relationships. It was comfortable, familiar. For a while, I forgot about the unease that had been gnawing at me since I turned onto that dirt road. But as the night wore on and the whiskey bottle emptied, I noticed Jim growing quieter, more withdrawn. His eyes kept darting to the windows, though all I could see beyond the glass was impenetrable darkness. "Everything all right?" I asked. Finally, unable to ignore it any longer, Jim startled as if he'd forgotten I was there. Yeah, he said quickly, "just keeping an ear out for critters. You'd be surprised what comes sniffing around these parts at night." I nodded, not entirely convinced. "So, what's the plan for tomorrow?" "Thought we'd head out early, try our luck up near Piney Ridge," Jim said, seeming to relax a bit as we talked about hunting. "There's a clearing up there where the deer like to graze. If we're quiet, we might bag ourselves a nice buck." We turned in not long after that, the whiskey and the long drive catching up with me. As I lay on the narrow cot listening to Jim's soft snores from across the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was just being out of the city, away from the constant hum of traffic and the glow of streetlights, but in the pitch black of the cabin, every creak of the structure settling, every rustle from the forest outside seemed magnified, ominous. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, Jim was shaking me awake. The cabin was still dark, but a faint gray light was seeping in around the edges of the curtains. "Rise and shine, city boy," Jim said, already fully dressed. "Time to bag some deer." By the time I'd grabbed my rifle and stepped out onto the porch, the sky was beginning to lighten, the stars fading as dawn approached. I groaned, fumbling for my watch. It was barely 5 a.m., but I dragged myself up, splashed some cold water on my face from a basin in the corner, and pulled on my hunting clothes. The forest was alive with sound, birds calling to each other, small animals scurrying through the underbrush. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed sort of way. As we set off down a barely visible trail, rifles slung over our shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Jim led the way, moving with assurance that spoke of familiarity with the terrain. I followed as best I could, trying to step where he stepped and move as quietly as he did. But every twig that snapped under my boots, every rustle of leaves as I pushed through the undergrowth seemed impossibly loud. We hiked for what felt like hours, the forest growing denser, the light struggling to penetrate the canopy overhead. Jim barely spoke, just occasional whispered instructions. "Watch your step here, or keep an eye out for tracks." Finally, we emerged into a small clearing. The early morning mist was just beginning to lift, revealing dew-drenched grass and wildflowers. It was the kind of scene you'd see on a postcard, almost too perfect to be real. Jim held up a hand, signaling me to stop. He pointed silently to the far edge of the clearing where the trees thinned out. I squinted, trying to see what he was pointing at. Then I saw it, the flick of an ear, the smooth line of a tawny flank. A deer barely visible in the shadows. My heart began to race as I slowly and carefully raised my rifle. Jim nodded encouragingly, his own weapon at the ready. I took a deep breath, steadying my aim, my finger curled around the trigger. And then everything went to hell. A sound ripped through the quiet morning, a roar that was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was too big to be a bear, too wild to be human. A deer bolted, vanishing into the trees in the blink of an eye. I turned to Jim, my mouth open to ask what the hell that was. But the words died in my throat. Jim's face had gone chalk white, his eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen before. "Run," he whispered, his voice barely audible and then louder. He took off, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for stealth. I hesitated for a split second, confusion warring with the instinct to follow. That moment of hesitation nearly cost me everything. Something huge burst from the trees behind me, so close I could feel the wind of its passage. I didn't look back, I ran. I tore through the forest branches, whipping at my face as roots threatened to trip me with every step. I could hear Jim ahead of me, his ragged breathing and the crash of his passage through the undergrowth behind us. I didn't want to think about what was behind us. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. The roar came again, close. This time I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of something massive, a blur of dark fur and gleaming teeth. It was like no animal I'd ever seen before. Too big to be a wolf, too fast to be a bear. I put on an extra burst of speed. My rifle, long forgotten, dropped somewhere in that mad dash. From the clearing up ahead, I saw Jim veer sharply to the left. I followed, nearly losing my footing on the steep, leaf-strewn slope. And then suddenly we were back at the cabin. Jim hit the porch at a dead run, yanking the door open and diving inside. I was right behind him, slamming the door shut and throwing the bolt. For a long moment, we both stood there gasping for breath. The only sound was our panting and the pounding of my heart in my ears. Then slowly I became aware of a scratching sound like claws on wood coming from outside. When I started to say, Jim clamped a hand over my mouth, shaking his head violently. His eyes were wide, darting between me and the door. We stood like that for what felt like hours, barely breathing and listening to that awful scratching. Eventually it faded away, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest. I followed, my legs shaking so badly I could barely walk. Jim's hand dropped from my mouth. He staggered over to the table, collapsing into a chair. "Jim," I said, my voice hoarse, "what the hell was that?" He didn't answer right away. Just reached for the whiskey bottle with trembling hands, took a long pull straight from the bottle, then offered it to me. I accepted gratefully. The burn of the alcohol steadied my nerves somewhat. Jim said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've seen things out in these woods, things that shouldn't exist, but never like that." I stared at him, disbelief warring with the evidence of my own eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Why'd bring me out here if you knew it was dangerous?" Jim laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Would you have believed me?" Hell, I barely believe it myself. Most days I thought maybe I was imagining things going crazy out here all alone. I wanted someone else to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell at him for putting us in danger, for not warning me. But the lost, scared look in his eyes stopped me. Instead, I asked, "How long has this been going on?" Jim shrugged, taking another swig from the bottle. "A few months, maybe. At first it was just little things, tracks that were too big. The other night that didn't sound quite right. Then I started seeing shadows, movement at the edge of my vision, and then he trailed off his gaze, going distant. I waited, not daring to push. About a month ago," he continued, "finally I found something up near Buzzard's Peak. It was Chris Curtis. It was like nothing I've ever seen, torn apart, like something had been feeding on it, but it was big, too big to be a deer or a bear. A chill ran down my spine." "What are you saying, Jim?" He looked at me, his eyes haunted. "I'm saying there's something out there, something that doesn't belong, and I think it knows we're here." The rest of the day passed in a haze of fear and uncertainty. We stayed in the cabin, jumping in every sound from outside. Jim's rifle was propped by the door, my own long lost in the forest. Not that I thought it would do much good against whatever that thing was. As night fell, the forest seemed to press in around us. The darkness beyond the windows, absolute. We took turns keeping watch, though I'm not sure what we thought we could do if that thing came back. I must have dozed off at some point because I jerked awake to the sound of Jim cursing. What is it?" I asked, fumbling for a weapon that wasn't there. Jim was at the window, peering out into the darkness. "Something's out there," he whispered. I saw eyes reflecting in the moonlight. I joined him at the window, squinting into the gloom. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then a flash of movement caught my eye, something large moving just at the edge of the tree line. And then I saw them, eyes glowing, an eerie yellow-green in the darkness. Jesus, I breathed. What do we do? It was the longest night of my life. Jim's jaw clenched. We wait, and we pray. Doesn't decide to come any closer. We huddled in that cabin, watching those eyes move back and forth at the edge of the clearing. Sometimes they would disappear for a while, only to reappear closer as if testing our defenses. As dawn approached, the eyes finally retreated, vanishing into the forest. We breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the fear didn't leave. If anything, it grew stronger in the light of day, now that we knew for certain we weren't alone out here. "We need to leave," I said, already packing my few belongings now while it's light. Jim nodded, his face grim. Yeah, you're right. We'll take my Jeep. It can handle the rough terrain better than your truck. We threw our gear into the Jeep, not bothering to secure the cabin. Jim gunned the engine, and for a moment I thought we might actually make it out of there. Then the engine sputtered and died. Jim turned the key again and again, but the engine refused to catch. No, he muttered, panic rising in his voice. This can't be happening. I jumped out, popping the hood. No mechanic, but even I could see the problem. The engine had been mauled, there was no other word for it. Deep gouges ran through the metal wires hung loose, and fluids dripped onto the ground. Jim, I called out, my voice shaking. You need to see this. He came around, took one look at the destroyed engine, and let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. It was here, he said, his voice hollow. While we were in the cabin, it was right here. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We had been so focused on watching the tree line, we hadn't even considered that it might come up to the cabin itself. And now we were stranded. What about my truck? I asked, grasping at straws. Jim shook his head. Your truck won't make it down these roads. And even if it could look, I followed his gaze to my pickup. All 4 tires had been slashed to ribbons. It doesn't want us to leave, Jim said, his voice barely above a whisper. We retreated back to the cabin, the feeling of being trapped closing in around us. Jim paced back and forth, muttering to himself while I tried to think of a way out of this mess. We could try to hike out, I suggested. The thought of being out in those woods made my skin crawl. Jim shook his head. It's miles to the nearest town through dense forest. We'd never make it, especially not with that thing out there. Then what do we do? I demanded, frustration and fear making my voice sharp. Jim stopped pacing, his face set in grim determination. We hunted, he said, before it hunts us. I stared at him. Sure, I had misheard. Hunted? Did you see the size of that thing? Are you insane? You've got a better idea. Dem shot back. We can't leave. We can stay here forever. Sooner or later, it's gonna come for us. At least this way, we have a chance. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was crazy, but deep down I knew he was right. We were out of options. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Jim had a few more rifles stashed in the cabin, along with boxes of ammunition. We cleaned the guns, loaded them, strapped on as much ammo as we could carry. As the sun began to set, we set out into the forest. The plan, such as it was to try to track the creature back to its lair. Jim thought he had a general idea of where it might be, a series of caves up in the hills, not far from where we had seen the deer. That morning, we weaved as quietly as we could through the darkening woods. Ever since on high alert, the forest seemed different now. Menacing shadows moved in ways they shouldn't, and more than once I caught myself jumping at nothing more than the rustle of leaves in the wind. We'd been hiking for maybe an hour when Jim suddenly held up a hand, signaling me to stop. He pointed silently to a patch of disturbed earth a few yards ahead. As we drew closer, I saw what had caught his attention, tracks, but not like any animal tracks I'd ever seen before. They were huge, easily twice the size of a man's hand, with long, cruel-looking claw marks at the end of each toe. Jim crouched down, examining the tracks closely. "They're fresh," he whispered, "can't be more than an hour old." I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on my rifle. "So it's close?" Jim nodded grimly. "Come on, let's see where these lead." We followed the tracks deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, the underbrush thicker. More than once we had to backtrack and search for where the trail picked up again, but always those massive paw prints led us on. The moon had risen, casting an eerie silver light through the canopy. When we came to a small clearing, Jim stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into him. "Oh God," he breathed. I stepped around him, then immediately wished I hadn't. The clearing was a slaughterhouse, blood-soaked earth, scraps of fur and flesh scattered about, and in the center a half-eaten carcass that might once have been a deer. But it wasn't just the carnage that made my blood run cold. It was the fact that some of the remains were wrong, too big to be deer, too small to be bear. And some of these scattered bones looked disturbingly human, like Jim was bent over, retching into the bushes. I stood frozen, unable to look away from the gruesome scene. And then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere. At once, Jim, I hissed my voice, barely audible over the sound of my pounding heart. "We need to go now." He straightened up, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. His face was ashen in the moonlight. "Yeah," he whispered back. "Yeah, let's—" The growl came again, louder this time, closer too. We both spun around, rifles raised, trying to peer into the impenetrable darkness beyond the clearing. For a moment, everything was still. Then the bushes to our left exploded outward. It was on us before we could even think to fire at a mass of fur and muscle and teeth moving faster than anything that size had any right to. I caught a glimpse of yellow eyes, of slavering jaws, and then I was on the ground, the breath knocked out of me. I heard Jim scream, sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly. I struggled to my feet, fumbling with my rifle. The creature, and I still couldn't bring myself to put a name to it, was hunched over Jim's prone form. I fired. The sound was deafening in the quiet of the forest. The creature reared back, letting out a roar of pain or rage. I couldn't tell which. It turned those glowing eyes on me, and for a moment I was sure I was about to die. Then it was gone, crashing off into the underbrush with a speed that belied its size. I stood there shaking my ears, ringing from the gunshots. I called, my voice trembling, "Jim, you..." "Okay." There was no answer. I stumbled over to where he lay, praying to a god I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Jim was alive, but only just. His chest was a mess of blood and torn flesh. He looked up at me, his eyes glazed with pain. "Curtis," he gasps. You have to..." "Oh, don't try to talk," I said frantically, trying to think of what to do. We were miles from help, with no way to call for assistance. "I'm gonna get you out of here." "Okay, just hang on." Jim's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "No," he wheezed, "you have to kill it before it kills again." His grip loosened, his eyes rolling back in his head. I checked his pulse, weak but still there. I couldn't leave him here, not like this. But I couldn't carry him back to the cabin either, not with that thing still out there. In the end, I did the only thing I could think of. I dragged Jim to the edge of the clearing, using branches and leaves to construct a makeshift shelter around him. It wouldn't keep him safe if the creature came back, but it might keep him alive long enough for me to do what Kill It, Jim had said. As if I had any hope of taking down something like that on my own. But as I looked at Jim's pale face, at the blood soaking into the forest floor, I knew I didn't have a choice. I checked my rifle, making sure it was loaded. Then, taking a deep breath, I set off in the direction the creature had gone. The trail wasn't hard to follow, broken branches, scraps of fur caught on thorns, and most telling of all, drops of dark blood that gleamed black in the moonlight. My shot had hit home, at least. I moved as quietly as I could, every sense straining for any sign of the creature's return. The forest was eerily silent, as if every living thing was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the dark woods, but eventually I came to the mouth of a cave, half hidden behind a tangle of vines and brush. The trail of blood led straight inside. I hesitated at the entrance, my heart hammering in my chest. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn and run to get as far away from this place as I could. But the image of Jim bleeding and broken in that clearing steeled my resolve. I switched on the flashlight I'd grabbed from my pack, took a deep breath and stepped into the cave. The smell hit me first, a rank musky odor that made my eyes water. As my light swept across the cave floor, I saw piles of bones, some stripped clean, others still bearing scraps of rotting flesh. And there in the back of the cave, a pair of glowing eyes. I raised my rifle, but before I could fire, the creature launched itself at me. I squeezed the trigger. The muzzle flash momentarily blinded me. I felt a searing pain across my chest as claws raked through my jacket and into the flesh beneath. I stumbled backward out of the cave and into the moonlight, the creature following its massive form, filling the cave entrance in the silver light. I found I got a clear look at what we were dealing with. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, bigger than a bear, with the general shape of a wolf but wrong. Its fur was patchy, revealing leathery skin. Beneath its face was a nightmarish blend of canine and something almost human, the muzzle full of teeth that were far too long and sharp. As it stalked towards me, I noticed its movements were labored. Dark blood matted its fur in several places. My earlier shots and the one in the cave had done some damage. I fired again and again. The creature staggered but kept coming. I backed away, reloading as I moved. My back hit a tree and I knew I was out of options. The creature reared up on its hind legs, easily twice my height. I raised my rifle one last time, aiming for its head. As I pulled the trigger, I sent up a silent apology to Jim. I had tried, but it looked like I was about to fail. The gun clicked empty. The creature's jaws opened wide, descending towards me. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. A shot rang out so close it made my ears ring. The creature let out a horrible, piercing shriek. My eyes flew open in time to see it stumble backward, a gaping wound in its chest. Another shot and another. The creature thrashed, howling in pain and fury, and then, with one final earth-shaking roar, it collapsed. I stood there frozen, unable to believe what I was seeing. Slowly, I turned to look behind me. Jim stood there, pale as a ghost, my discarded rifle in his hands. He gave me a weak smile, then crumpled to the ground. The next few hours passed in a blur. Somehow I managed to get Jim back to the cabin. His wounds were bad, but not as devastating as I had first feared. The creature, whatever it was, had mostly caught him with a glancing blow. As I patched him up as best I could with the limited first aid supplies in the cabin, Jim filled me in on what had happened. He had regained consciousness not long after I left, dragged himself to his feet and followed my trail. He had arrived at the cave just in time to see me backing away from the creature out of ammo. "Couldn't let you have all the glory," he joked weakly as I bandaged his chest. We spent a tense night in the cabin, taking turns, keeping watch, but nothing came. As dawn broke, we ventured out, half expecting to find that the events of the night before had been some kind of shared hallucination. But the creature's body was still there, massive and undeniable in the morning light. In the daylight, it looked even more bizarre. A patchwork of animal parts that shouldn't go together, like some mad scientist's experiment gone wrong. "What do we do now?" I asked, staring down at the carcass. Jim was quiet for a long moment. "We bury it," he said, finally deep, "and then we never speak of this again." It took us most of the day to dig a hole big enough and deep enough to hold the creature's remains. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, but every time I looked up, scanning the tree line, I saw nothing. We finished as the sun was setting, covering the makeshift grave with rocks and branches. Jim insisted on saying a few words, not for the creature, he explained, but for its victims. As we trudged back to the cabin, exhausted and sore, Jim turned to me. "You know," he said, his voice low, "there are stories in these hills. Old stories about things that live in the deep woods, things that aren't supposed to exist." I nodded, too tired to argue. After what we've seen, I was ready to believe just about anything. "Maybe," Jim continued, "maybe we weren't meant to kill it. Maybe we've upset some kind of balance. I stopped looking at him sharply. "What are you saying?" He shrugged, wincing at the movement. He was saying, "I don't think this is over, not by a long shot." We left the next morning, Jim's Jeep miraculously starting without issue. The drive back to civilization was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. As we hit the main road, Jim turned to me, "Curtis," he said, his voice serious. "What happened out there? We can't ever talk about it to anyone, you understand?" I nodded. Who would believe us anyway? We parted ways at the edge of Charleston, promising to keep in touch, but as I watched Jim's Jeep disappear around a corner, I had a sinking feeling that this was the last time I'd see my cousin. I tried to put the events of that weekend behind me to go back to my normal life, my dead-end job, my dingy apartment. But every night I dreamed of yellow eyes and slavering jaws, and every day I scanned the news, half expecting to see reports of mysterious animal attacks in Logan County. It was 3 months later when I got the call. Jim had disappeared. His co-workers at the lumber mill said he'd been acting strange, talking about noises in the woods, about things moving in the shadows, and then one day he just didn't show up for work. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core where he had gone, back to those woods, back to that cabin. As I packed my bag, checking and double-checking my rifle, I tried to tell myself that I was being paranoid, that Jim had probably just gone on a bender, that he'd turn up in a few days with a killer hangover and a sheepish grin. But deep down I knew better. Whatever we had encountered in those woods, whatever balance we had upset, it wasn't finished with us yet, and so, against every instinct screaming at me to run in the opposite direction, I found myself once again driving those winding back roads of West Virginia, heading into the heart of the forest. This time I told myself I would be ready. This time I would end it for good. But as I turned onto that narrow dirt road, the trees closing in behind me like a trap, snapping shut, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a terrifying thought. What if it's ready for me? The cabin looked exactly as we had left it. A lonely outpost in a sea of wilderness. As I pulled up, killing the engine, I half expected Jim to come striding out, grinning and asking what took me so long. But there was only silence broken by the whisper of wind through the trees. I approached cautiously, rifle at the ready. The door creaked open at my touch, revealing the dim interior. Everything was as we had left it. Rumpled bedding, empty whiskey bottle on the table, first aid kit still open from when I had patched Jim up. But there was something else. The smell, faint but unmistakable, the same musky, rank odor I remembered from the creature's cave. My heart pounded. I searched the cabin thoroughly, but found no sign of Jim or anything else out of place, just that lingering smell, a reminder that something had been here recently. As night fell, I found myself facing a difficult decision. Logic told me to leave and get help, come back with a search party, but I knew in my gut that if I left now, I might never find Jim. Whatever was out there, it was connected to these woods, to this place. If I wanted answers, I had to stay. I secured the cabin as best I could, piling furniture against the door and windows. Then I settled in for a long night, my rifle across my lap, staring out into the darkness. The attack came just before dawn. I must have dozed off because I jerked awake to the sound of splintering wood. The chair I'd wedged under the doorknob went flying as the door burst inward, and there, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky, was a shape that haunted my nightmares. It was like the creature we had killed, but different, larger if that were possible, with a coat of shaggy black fur that seemed to absorb the light. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural blue fire. I raised my rifle, squeezing off 2 shots in rapid succession. The creature stumbled. It didn't fall. Instead, it let out a roar that shook the cabin to its foundations. I dove for the window, smashing through the glass and rolling to my feet. Outside behind me, I heard the crack and groan of timber as the creature tore through the cabin like it was made of paper. I ran. There was no plan, no strategy, just blind panic driving me deeper into the woods. I could hear the creature behind me, its massive form crashing through the underbrush. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. Eventually, I burst out of the tree line into a familiar clearing, the same one where we had found the creature's kills months ago. As I stumbled to a halt, gasping for breath, I realized my mistake. I had let the creature herd me here to its hunting grounds. I spun around, raising my rifle, but I knew it was too late. The creature emerged from the trees, moving with a terrible grace that belied its size. It circled me slowly, those eerie blue eyes never leaving my face, and then, to my utter shock, it spoke. "You should not have come back." The voice was deep, guttural, barely recognizable as speech, but the words were clear. "Where's Jim?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Despite my best efforts, the creature's muzzle twisted in what might have been a smile. "The other one. He understood. He joined us." "What do you mean?" I asked, a cold dread settling in my stomach. Instead of answering, the creature threw back its head and howled. The sound was answered by other howls coming from all around the clearing. And then, from the shadows of the trees, other shapes emerged. I did not like the creature, but not quite. Some walked on all fours, others on two legs. Some looked more human, others more animal, and all of them had those same glowing eyes. One of the shapes separated itself from the pack, moving towards me. As it stepped into the moonlight, I felt my heart stop. It was Jim, or what was left of him. His body was twisted halfway between human and beast, but his eyes were still his own, filled with pain and sorrow and something else, something hungry. "Curtis," he growled, his voice a raspy parody of itself. "You shouldn't have cut." I raised my rifle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. "Jim," I whispered, "what happened to you?" He took another step forward. "I told you. You said we upset the balance. This is the price." The other creatures were closing in, now forming a circle around us. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my bones, that I wasn't getting out of this clearing alive. Not as myself, anyway. "Sorry, Curtis," Jim said, and I could see the last flicker of humanity fading from his eyes. "But you have to join us now. It's the only way." As they rushed in, their howls filling the night air, I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed for a quick end. But the end didn't come. Instead, I felt a searing pain like liquid fire coursing through my vein. I screamed, my body convulsing, my bones cracking and reforming. The last thing I remembered before the darkness took me was the sound of my own voice, twisted and inhuman, joining the chorus of howls. I don't know how long I was gone. Time loses all meaning when you're not quite human anymore. Days, weeks, months, they all blend together in a haze of hunger and instinct and the thrill of the hunt. But somewhere deep inside, a part of me remained. A small voice growing weaker by the day that remembered who I used to be. That voice is what's allowing me to tell this story now. I rhymed in bits and pieces what we were. The old stories Jim had mentioned were true. These woods, these mountains, they had always been home to something else, something ancient and powerful. The creatures, my pack now I suppose, were its children, its guardians. For centuries they had lived in balance with the land, taking only what they needed, staying hidden from human eyes. But as the world changed, as humans encroached further and further into their territory, that balance began to shift. The creature Jim and I had killed was one of the oldest, one of the strongest. Its death had upset things in ways we couldn't have imagined. The others needed to replenish their numbers, to adapt, and so they turned to us. Not everyone who enters these woods is changed. Most of simply prey, but some, those with a connection to this land, or those who have seen too much, are given a choice, join or die. Jim had made his choice, and in the end, so would I. But that human part of me, that voice that wouldn't quite fade away, it kept fighting, and slowly, so slowly, I began to remember, to think, to plan. It took everything I had, every ounce of willpower, but eventually I managed to break away from the pack. I ran, not knowing or caring where I was going, just needing to get away. I found myself back at the cabin, or what was left of it. As I stood there staring at the ruins, I felt the change come over me again, but this time it was different. This time, I was in control. The transformation was agonizing, bones cracking and reshaping, fur receding into skin. But when it was over, I stood on 2 legs again. Human. At least on the outside. I knew I couldn't stay. The pack would be looking for me, and even if I could evade them, I was a danger to anyone I might encounter. I was no longer fully human, and I never would be again. So I ran. I ran until I reached civilization, stole some clothes, and kept running. I'd been running ever since. I don't know if I'll ever be free of this curse. I don't know if I'll ever be able to stop running, but I do know this.